Hello, I'm the new chair of the Planning Committee, Councillor Aidan Mundy of Pollard's Hill, and I welcome everyone watching at home and those in the chamber tonight. Before introducing the business tonight, I wanted to take an opportunity to thank the committee for voluntarily deciding to join planning. It's not an easy task presiding over such an important portfolio of work, but you have chosen to do this and should be commended for that. The decisions you will take on this committee have lasting impact beyond many of our lifetimes. And many will literally remake what our borough looks like. But don't think for a second you're presiding just over bricks and mortar. You're making decisions about opportunity. Whether a family with 2 young children will for the first time move into a property they can call their home, or an elderly resident can downsize locally and enable their existing property to be sold to the next generation, or even an entrepreneur can set up shop and create local jobs that we all want. So to rise to this challenge, we all need to adapt our ways of working, and the committee has already taken steps with the introduction of a technical briefing to enable members to ask technical questions ahead of the committee in order to get the information we need ahead of tonight. And you can see that in the included in the attached modification sheet to tonight's agenda. In the coming months, there will be many more iterative changes to support and streamline the work of officers and increase the quality of our decision making. This could not have been done without the amazing team of Merton Council. I want to pay tribute to our former head of development management and building control planning, Leslie, who has moved on to another role in the council, and welcome her successor, Jonathan Berry, next to me here, who has already started to make a positive impact. Also want to thank Tim and Stuart and their area team for the work they've done so far. Democratic Services, Amy and Bola, and the team who also make this possible. So without further ado, we are down to business. So for everyone's got agendas in front of them or at home, I'll be taking the actual planning items in the following order. So that's item 10, 11, 14, 8, 13, 15, and 9. And then I'll come back to reciting the agenda if we get there. Items 5 and 6 relating to Sandringham House will not be on the agenda tonight. And we will take a short break after the first application or after 1.5 hours, whatever comes sooner. And before I take the first item, I will then pause again and just run through how this procedure works, because many of you may be old hats at this, and many of you may be new to the planning committee as well. So the apologies I've received so far from Simon McGrath, who's been replaced by Matthew Willis. Thank you very much. And can I have any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare that I work for an organisation who has carried out professional services for the applicants in agenda items 10 and 11, and will therefore be leaving the meeting during consideration of those items, and Councillor Butcher has kindly agreed to substitute for me.
Thank you very much. If you may now leave the chamber, Councillor Butcher will retrieve you once we're done with those items. And thank you very much for stepping in the place. Also, a note on etiquette. What I normally tend to do is call councillors by their first name. I hope this doesn't offend anyone. It's just formality and ease. And so without further ado, moving to the next item, minutes of the previous meeting. Can I agree that they're a fair and accurate count? Apologies. Councillor Willis, you had your hand up.
Just quickly before we start, just getting the agenda items in order. Did you say we're skipping 5, which relates to Broadway, as well as 6?
So apologies. I mean 6 and 7. Just 5 is at the end.
Thank you.
Minutes of the last meeting. Can I have someone to second that they're a true and accurate count? Very much, Councillor Wilson. So on to our first item of business. So that will be item 10 on everyone's agenda. So that will be the 106, 106 new properties, including affordable homes, 2 new tennis courts and other sporting facilities and playground. So what I will just do, I'm just going to outline how we would run through all these so that everyone's aware. So what I would normally do is ask the officer to speak on this item to introduce it and make reference to the modification sheet, and that's Tim Lipscomb who'll be making that presentation. I'll ask objectors to speak first, then the applicant, then the ward councillors. Officers will be asked to respond and may make reference to either the technical briefing or the previous information submitted. We'll then take questions from councillors. I'll try and take 3 at a time. And then we'll open up for comments and general observations. And then we may or may not need to debate any conditions before we move to a vote. Is that very clear? Any questions? Super. All right, so if I, without further ado, over to Tim Lipscomb. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name's Tim Lipscomb. I'm the case officer for this application. I will take you through some slides on the screen whilst I talk through the proposal and the key issues. The site comprises the former Lesser Sports Ground, that's London Electricity Sports and Social Association, located to the south of Meadowview Road in Rains Park. The Lesser Sports Ground was a private facility for the sole use of company employees. The grounds were closed in 2000. The site is currently fenced off and not accessible to the public. The southwest corner of the site, and that's this area here, is in flood zone 3. I'll take you through some photos. So this is the site, fenced off and open grassland. An existing play area to the northern, well, just outside of the site, which is associated with the existing development on Meadowview Road. And that is that existing Meadowview Road, the existing development there. I'll come on to this later, but this was the subject of an appeal and a decision in 2009, which also provided for sporting uses in the tennis courts adjacent. Here you can see part of the Rains Park Tennis Club, and that's further along Meadowview Road. And then a view along a footpath out to the road on the western side of the site. In terms of the proposal, planning permission is sought for the redevelopment of the sports ground, involving the erection of 107 dwellings, 44 of which would be affordable homes, associated landscaping to form a parkland area, equipped children's play area, including flood mitigation, vehicular access and parking, plus the erection of 2 all-weather tennis courts with flood lighting, storage compound and parking, and a multi-use games area and outdoor gym area. This proposal has gone through various iterations, either at pre-application stage or at the stage of the previous application. So you would have seen in the report that there is a previous application for 89 units. This application raises a lot of similar issues to that proposal, and those issues are carried forward into this application also. So here you can see the original pre-application scheme. It came in 2 options for development across the site. This was the second scheme, which involved a degree of outdoor sporting use. This was the previous application, similar in some ways to the current scheme in that the development is focused into this area with the corner down here left undeveloped. Officers had some concerns about this scheme, not only in terms of site optimization and maximizing the development on site, but also how it tied in with the surrounding road network, the fact that it was very car dominant and didn't leave enough meaningful space for open space. We had more suggested proposals throughout the course of that application, which then led on to the final scheme. So really, that was just to give you a feel for the development of the evolution of the design so far. So this is the proposal that we have currently. the access from Meadowview Road onto a main avenue that leads south towards a vista and a meeting spot. The road would then be one way around this section to reduce the dominance of cars using the site and the prominence of parked cars by having narrow roads. You can see trim trail, play areas, and the mugger courts and tennis courts proposed over here. And this is parking proposed for those tennis courts. There are a number of separate character areas. So you have this avenue here, which will be very wide at around 20 meters for lots of on-street parking, and landscaping has a lot of swales, and flood mitigation is incorporated into the green landscaping across the site. Leading down to here, this is an attenuation basin. There's also underground storage attenuation, but this would be a feature of the site effectively. Another character area is along here where you have an intimate neighborhood with cars removed from the setting. And then you have the sections along here overlooking the open space, forming another character area. This side of the road has been planned out as a response to the development on Meadowview Road, and so as faces opposite it, and is higher development along here, and these are flatted units. Looking at the wider site location, here is the application site and the A3 up here to get your bearings. And then you can see the application site as it is currently laid to grass effectively. In terms of the surrounding area, this is the development on Meadowview. And then you can see the surrounding area is characterized by two-story interwar semi-detached and terrace housing. And again, you can see more of the surrounding dwelling types in the area. This is a site constraints plan. Really, the only thing I'd like to get across from here is where the flood zone is, the fact that the site slopes down from north to south. And the blue and the purple are some existing attenuation measures on site, so underground attenuation and filter system here. So the proposed site layout, as you can see, has now been refined. We've had a number of amendments, including amendments to materials to better reflect the character of the area. Some key points to point out are access routes across the site. So here you can see that the scheme has been designed in mind with maintaining the existing access routes which exist, and an access through here which can provide either an alternative to walking up Grand Drive if you choose, or of course across to Westway here, as well as accessing many parts of the site on foot. In terms of the visual appearance of the scheme, you can see on the drawings up here where this section is taken from. So this would be fronting the public open space. This would be fronting Meadowview to the north. This is the central avenues. And here you can see a hierarchy of building heights. So 4 stories here, moving to 3 stories, 2 stories, and then single stories are none of the dwellings, but ancillary elements. I'm afraid you probably can't see this as well as I can on the screen, but this is a breakdown of parking. To summarize, the blue is tennis club parking. The dark green is parking which has been lost from here, but then replaced. So we have a section here where the access is to be made, where the parking spaces are replaced in the new layout, and a section here where parking spaces are to be lost, but they're re-provided over here. As mentioned, there is a lot in the way of flood mitigation. The existing attenuation would be slightly moved to allow for the development, but would be replaced. There would be swales, as mentioned. Land drains are provided in the flood plateau area, which will be all across this section. Specialist free draining tennis courts are to be used with permeable paving for driveways and roads, and the scheme will also include rain gardens. I will come on to the impact on flooding later, but this is just to set out the proposal. This is the layout of different house types and tenures. So you can see the affordable housing in orange here and also outlined in grey here, but a mix of house sizes. Again, here, this more clearly shows the breakdown of market housing and affordable units, with the affordable units being in yellow. The landscape master plan, obviously same as the other ones, but shows the positioning of proposed trees across the site and the treatment of the open space. You can see there's going to be areas of wildflower planting and semi-natural vegetation, as well as simply grassland. And here, again, a key for the various trees to be planted and some indicative illustrations there. Here, in some more detail, you can see the play area, the trim trail, and the outdoor gym. And this is the sort of equipment that we would expect to see there. In terms of the design response, this plan simply shows that the red area here is designed to respond to meadow view, whereas this area is more a response to the green space. In terms of CGIs and the actual appearance of the development, this is a view from meadow view, so the existing road that comes into the site. This would be a view from the southwest corner of the site, looking northeast towards the dwellings. Sorry, bear with me. I think this one seems to have snuck in again. Some elevations have been in stores and ancillaries, which I won't spend too much time on. And these are now the elevations, although to be fair, you will probably get a better sense of it from the CGI visuals rather than these flat elevations. Floor plans are included as well. I won't spend too long on these, but it's simply to show that there's a good level of natural ventilation and dual aspect units across the site. There are 8 different house types, 2 apartments and 1 other flatted block, which have different forms. So there would be a fairly good mix of architectural form around the site, which all ties in a cohesive manner. So I'm just going through the floor plans and elevations to give you an idea of each house type. These are the apartment blocks that would be along Meadow View. And then some of the house types. Sorry, bear with me, it's taking a little while to scroll on. You'll see on some of these drawings some additional design features in the brickwork here. Windows to the side. There's a number of small scale amendments made throughout the course of the application in response to our urban designers' comments in order to break up some elevation, break up some massing on the elevations. If there's any of these plans members would like to see in more detail, I can come back to them, but I'm just going through fairly quickly to give you an idea of the visual appearance. Okay, and some very more in-depth plans here. Some key points to point out in terms of the proposal, and that is the affordable housing provision, which would be around 40%, 44 units. The amount of family housing provided, which is something the council are in need of. and the significant sustainability credentials, achieving 74% reduction in carbon dioxide levels, amongst other elements. The report sets out these in greater detail, and I would advise you look through the proposal section also for the details which I haven't covered in this presentation. In terms of contributions, there is in the region of 700,000 contribution for on and off-site sporting facilities, and £267,000 for the on-site open space and recreation facilities, and that would be for public use in perpetuity. Moving on, members will see there is some history to this site. The previous application, and this is at page 132 on the agenda, previous application was for 89 units. The current scheme has been amended since then. The previous application still remains a live case. However, the applicant has indicated it may be withdrawn following determination of the current application. Feedback was provided by the council's urban design officers during the application process, and requests to amend the scheme were made, which were considered to improve the layout, appearance, amount of open space, and placemaking of the proposal. Higher density development to optimize the site was sought, utilizing some taller buildings and townhouses across the scheme. Page 133 of the agenda, paragraph 4.6, dealing with planning history. It is clear that the acceptability of the development proposed under the 2008 application, and that's an application for the development of the houses on Meadowview and part of the tennis club. That was an enabling development, which allowed some of the open space to be used, but also provided for some improvement in the quality of the retained open space. Now, that 2008 application had this current application site identified as being land that would be used for sporting purposes. It is clear that the acceptability of the development proposed in 2008 was dependent on the provision of the enhanced sporting offer, including the use of the playing fields. A Section 106 agreement attached to that planning permission includes a number of clauses regarding the delivery of the retained sports field land. The Section 106 included clauses which required lease options on the sports field land to be exercised within specified timeframes by either the council or King's College School, Wimbledon. These lease options were not exercised within the specified timeframes, i.e. neither the council nor King's College came forward to take on use of the site. However, there were no clauses within the Section 106 which covered that eventuality, that none of the lease options were exercised by either the council or King's College. Therefore, the requirements of the Section 106 have fallen away, and it leaves the site in a degree of limbo in terms of future use. In terms of representations and consultations, at page 137, you'll see that this occupies a very large portion of the report. We felt it was important to have the comments of the residents' associations in there in full, and also Sport England. And the reason it's gone on for so long, I'm afraid, is because we've had a number of forwards and backwards with Sport England, with new information being received. So it does go on for some way, I'm afraid. It is unusual for a committee report to be that long. So in terms of representations, along with the more usual development controls concerns raised in representation letters, a key theme is the concern relating to the principle of development, that a sports field that was previously agreed to be retained as open space is now being considered for any residential development at all. Concerns have also been voiced by a number of sporting groups in relation to the marketing exercise carried out by the applicant and the validity of the conclusions. Members will note that under the previous associated application, the council sent out detailed questionnaires to all groups that expressed an interest in the use of the land in order to gauge the level of interest and to identify whether proposals were realistically deliverable. Just while I go through this, I'll take you back to a layout plan. Sport England initially raised no objection to the proposal. However, throughout the course of the application, a number of representations were received indicating that there were viable sporting uses for the site, but that the owners had not meaningfully engaged with any group seeking a sporting use. Therefore, on this basis, Sport England maintains its objection. Moving on to the principle of development, and that's page 218 onwards. And this is going to be a key consideration in this assessment. The site stands on designated open space, and the policy tests for that are set out on page 219. The application is a departure from the development plan, as there is a conflict with these open space policies until such time as the local plan is adopted and the site allocation is adopted. I'll come on to that site allocation in a moment. Merton's play and pitch strategy lists 5 sites which are potential housing and employment allocations that could directly impact upon current or former playing fields, and this site is one of those 5. A site allocation is included within the draft local plan for the site, and that's site RP6. So on pages 221 and 222, and at paragraph 7.1.18, you can see some details on the site allocation there. The key element of the assessment rests on the wording of the draft site allocation, in that sporting or community use of the whole site will have to be demonstrated as undeliverable before any other uses can be considered. The consideration of issues in this application is unique in that the planning history of the site has left the use of the land in limbo to some extent. The opportunity for the land to be used for sporting purposes was not taken up by either the council or King's College under the terms of the original section 106. The site is private land, which is not accessible to the public and has not played a role in sports provision for around 20 years. A summary of discussions between officers and the applicant in regards to the principle of development is at page 223. A number of third parties contacted the council to raise concern with the marketing exercise carried out by the applicant, and the council issued a questionnaire to interested parties requesting details of the proposals, funding and timescales. And this is so that we could get a clear idea of what those offers were, given that concern had been raised as to the marketing carried out by the applicant. The most developed offer for a sporting use on the site was put forward by the Cricket Consortium. And if you see paragraph 7.1.28, that includes some details on that. A layout plan showed 2 all-weather sports pitches, a cricket pitch, new car park, pavilion, cricket nets, screens, and a ground person store. The consortium valued the initial cost to be around 1.3 million, with the proposed yearly income being around 206,000, with 63,000 a year expected to be from advertising. However, the funding gap between the initial costs and what is available to the consortium do not address that gap. In addition, drainage work, which would likely be extensive, are not included, nor is any community infrastructure levy costs or the cost of a plan and application and the various associated supporting technical documents, which would likely run into the tens of thousands alone. Therefore, by way of assessment of the detailed finances, officers conclude that the deliverable sporting use for the entire site has not been shown, and that's we state that at 7.1.29, 7.1.30. Sport England has raised objection to the proposal. However, as set out in the report, whilst it is noted there is demand for the site, it has not been shown that a sporting use could be delivered. The proposed development would have tangible planning benefits in that it provides much needed housing, including a reasonable proportion of affordable housing and family housing. A large part of the site would be retained as parkland with a play area and multi-use games area available to the wider public, which would provide benefits not just for the future occupants, but nearby residents also. In addition, the proposal would provide flood mitigation, which would improve the situation off-site, and significant contributions for on and off-site sporting use to mitigate the loss of the site as a potential sporting site. Members should consider whether the application has reasonably demonstrated that there is no deliverable sporting use of the entire site and concluding whether the proposal is acceptable in principle. Moving on to the other elements of the proposal, affordable housing, and this is at page 230. The scheme meets the fast track route with the council's preferred tenure mix, and it's worth noting that it is rare that a housing scheme provides a policy level of affordable housing. In terms of the impact on the character of the area, there is obviously an impact. The site is currently an open field. It would be built upon. At page 233, you will see comments on layout, and pages 234, massing and heights, design and appearance. It's gone through a number of iterations, a number of various amendments to try and ensure that the scheme does reflect reasonably the local area. The provision of the larger buildings here forming a main street is considered to be sound. The continuation of existing elements of built form to fit in with the grain and pattern of surrounding development. As I mentioned earlier, providing a meaningfully wide space here to provide usable open space, and the creation of these various character areas is going to create a scheme that has the potential to be very high quality. At paragraph 7.4.21, you'll see a list of detailed design changes made in response to the urban designers' comments. The applicant has carried those out, and that we have those in the form of amended plans. The design review panel commented on a previous version of the scheme under the previous application. And you can see that the comments of the design review panel are within the report, but a discussion on those comments is at paragraph 7.4.30. The key theme emerging from those DRP comments, that's design review panel, is that the scheme lacked a clear vision or place shaping approach and lacked a sense of arrival to the site. The amendments to the scheme saw more focal points within the layout, reduced street widths to reduce the dominance of roads and cars, more greening of the scheme to improve the landscape and design, and a slightly altered layout that responded further to the increased size of open spaces proposed in the scheme. Officers consider that the proposed development has achieved a sense of arrival to the site with a traditional avenue formed along Meadowview. The view to the south along the new avenue to the plaza and destination space, and that's plaza and destination space at the bottom here, would provide a sense of legibility and provide a connection between the built form and the open space to the south. The amendments to the application are considered to have responded well to the comments made by DRP, and the proposed development has the potential to form a high quality neighbourhood for both new occupants and existing neighbours who live near the site. Moving on to residential amenity impact on 237, you'll see that the report goes through the impact on various nearby neighbours. For the reasons set out in the report, the impact is not considered to be materially harmful. Officers note that there would be some impact on light to the lower floors of properties on Meadowview Road, and that's the properties here facing, if you imagine the movement of the sun east to west, so there will be some marginal overshadowing of the very lower parts at some parts of the day. In terms of the standard of accommodation, and that's at page 240, all units meet or exceed London Plan standards in this regard. In addition, the proposal will provide a significant area of open green space for future and existing residents. In terms of safety and security, and that's page 243, the layout of the development has been revised to ensure that the open spaces receive adequate level of natural surveillance. The green area to the south of the site has been widened to ensure it does not form an uncomfortably narrow alleyway. Given the houses fronting onto this area, it is considered that the sufficient natural surveillance would be provided, and that's natural surveillance from these houses fronting onto this area. And there's also a buffer tree plant in two boundaries. Therefore, it's considered the arrangements would be acceptable. Officers note that use as a sports facility, as well as any mixed use of the scheme, would also present issues of access to the rear of properties, which has been raised in objection letters. Paragraph 7.8, fire safety. The application is accompanied by a fire statement. We haven't got comments back from the fire brigade, and that's unfortunately quite a common state of affairs. but the matter is to be dealt with under building regs in any event, and the applicant has provided all the information that they need to at this stage, including access for fire tenders. Page 244, Ecology and Urban Greening. There's a number of biodiversity enhancements proposed, along with the planting and the creation of the wetland type areas. The application site is fairly unique in that it includes extensive green space currently. And whilst the overall level of green space in terms of looking at it on a plan would be lost, the green space that is retained would be of a high standard, with a range of planting, semi-natural vegetation, and wildflowers, but also with ancillary facilities such as the play area, trim trail and tennis courts to improve the quality of that open space. The proposal would meet the London Plan urban greening target of 0.4, and it's likely that we won't see many other schemes that are able to meet the urban greening target, as this is, as I say, a fairly unique site from that point of view. Moving on to transport, page 245. Car parking is provided at a ratio of 0.92 spaces per unit, which would meet London Plan standards. Cycle parking would be provided in excess of London Plan requirements. In terms of trip generation, the application has shown that any increases in traffic would not have an adverse impact on the local road network. Page 248, climate change. You'll see that there are significant measures over and above the policy requirements, in that the policy requirements for 35% reduction in carbon dioxide is being met and exceeded at above 70%. In terms of flooding, page 250, part of the site is located within flood zone 3, and floodplain compensation has been provided to account for the loss of floodplain storage. This provides protection to the proposed development site whilst offering a significant betterment to the surrounding area. A number of representation letters have flagged up flooding and standing water in gardens and roads in the area historically. The development's drainage strategy will apply sustainable urban drainage systems, techniques, including the use of permeable and piped swale systems, rainwater garden, and an attenuation basin, operating a cascade system to provide water management and quality benefits to the site. The existing runoff rate of the site is 13.9 litres per second, and under the proposed scenario, that would be reduced to 5.76 litres per second, therefore achieving a significant off-site betterment. The conclusion, page 254. The application has a convoluted history and background relating to the potential for a sporting use on the site. The land south of Meadowview should have historically been used to provide playing fields as set out by the inspector under the 2009 appeal decision for enabling residential development. The option for use of the land for sporting purposes was not taken up by either King's College or the London Borough of Merton, seemingly due to concerns regarding ongoing maintenance costs. The Section 106 agreement did not include clauses for this eventuality. Given this background, the site has been considered under the local plan process and has been put forward as draft site allocation RP6, specifying that sporting or community use of the entire site will have to be proven as undeliverable before any other uses can be considered. Officers have carefully considered the arguments put forward by the applicant. A number of concerns were raised in regards to the method in which the site had been marketed, and further information was sought from interested parties by planning officers by way of a questionnaire, which requested details of the offers, including funding streams funding streams. Whilst there is interest for the site and bids have been made, the level of investment required and the gaps in funding identified in the proposed bids is such that officers conclude that the application process has demonstrated that the delivery of the entire site for sports use is not deliverable. Sport England, whilst initially supporting the application and associated financial contributions towards sports facilities, has withdrawn this support and object on the basis that interested groups have expressed both interest in the site and set out workable bids for a sporting use. Therefore, whilst the objection of Sport England has been carefully considered, officers conclude that the application has demonstrated compliance with the emerging site allocation requirements. Members are advised that whilst the new London plan has been submitted to the Secretary of State for public examination, it is not yet adopted policy. However, due to its advanced stage in the process, this site application should be awarded weight in the assessment process. In addition to considering the more general planning issues set out in the report, members should consider whether the use of the site for residential use with the provision of publicly accessible open space, the on-site sporting and recreation facilities, along with the contributions towards off-site sporting facilities, would provide sufficient mitigation for the loss of this designated open space, albeit not currently publicly accessible. Moving on from the principle of development, the proposed development would contribute towards meeting the housing needs of the borough and would provide policy compliant levels of on-site affordable housing, which is a significant planning benefit to be considered in the overall planning balance. Officers conclude that the principle of development has been established to be acceptable, subject to suitable mitigation via the Section 106 agreement. The proposed development would provide for much needed housing, including family-sized housing, served by high-quality open space, new and improved publicly accessible recreation and sporting facilities with good sustainability credentials. Flood risk impacts will be mitigated for and overall flood risk would reduce. The proposed development would encroach onto designated open space, but the current open space has limited value. The proposal would mean that the site could not be used for an entirely sporting use in the future. However, the proposal would provide a substantial level of housing, including affordable housing, sports facilities on and off site would be provided, improved flood resilience to the site and surroundings, and provision of publicly accessible parkland. Having regard to the relevant material considerations, officers consider that the package of mitigation would outweigh the loss of open space and therefore recommend approval subject to conditions and a legal agreement as detailed at page 256. The only thing I'd like to draw members' attention to is the modification sheet where they can see the additional objections and supports received and the list of responses to members' queries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. I just want to make a point. I didn't interrupt Tim when I heard the gallery remark about when he discussed about car travel. I would appreciate if we just respect everyone who speaks and we allow them to finish without comment or justification or laughter or anything at all like that. It's quite a big thing for me, and I have excessive powers in this area and I will exercise them if needed. So without further ado, over to our next set of speakers. So I believe we've got them all in, apart from Hina Bakari, who will be speaking on Zoom. And I think we'll be going to John Elbridge first. Is that correct, John? Is it John? Sure, no worries. I'll come over. We've got it from here.
Okay. Hope that doesn't come out of my 3 minutes. I'm speaking on behalf of the local residents association and the hundreds of objectors. 20 years ago, Barrett's failed in an application to build 111 flats on their lesser sports ground. They sold the land to a company called Durham. Durham applied 14 years ago to build 44 houses and flats, which was refused by this committee. Their appeal was allowed by a planning inspector in 2009, but the inspector made it clear that this was a one-off development to enable the large majority of the ground to be improved and retained for junior sports with the construction of a pavilion. Durham sold the land to Beltway and they built the 44 units which now make up Meadowview Road. And the purchasers bought their homes on firm assurances by Beltway that the sports ground would be maintained. Merton's local plan designates the land as open space. It also requires that, quotes, sporting or community use of the whole site will have to be demonstrated as undeliverable before any other uses can be considered. The house owners and the community have for the past 10 years been betrayed by Beltway. The evidence we have cited at length proves that Beltway has throughout refused to discuss with clubs or schools any use of the ground for junior sports. Instead, they have fenced it off in the hope that in time they can extract more profit by further development. The land has been unused for sport only because Beltway prevented this. They should not be allowed to profit by their cynical action. There is now a consortium of 2 cricket clubs and a junior school desperate to use the ground, but whose costed proposals have been dismissed by Beltway. These proposals are strongly supported by Sport England, who have formally objected to this application. The officer's report gives no reason why the expert view of Sport England that the proposals are financially viable and deliverable has been rejected. The COVID crisis showed that there is a huge unmet need for land for sports and recreation. We submit that the company must be held to the terms on which it bought the land, and this application must be refused. The land is designated as open space for sport and recreation, and the application clearly violates this usage. New housing should be built on brownfield sites and not on green space. The local infrastructure cannot cope with another 107 units of accommodation in addition to the 456 new homes recently granted permission on the Tesco site. There are not sufficient GPs, dentists, school places, and the traffic along Grand Drive, as we residents know, is already static for much of the day. If, however, the committee is minded to grant permission, Sport England point out that the application should be referred to the Secretary of State. The officer's report of such length does not refer to this important matter, and we would ask the officers, why not? Why is it not being referred if minded to approve it? Our MP, Stephen Hammond, joins with the residents in strongly urging the committee to reject the application. He has...
Thank
Sorry?
you. Time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Shamet Ghosh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee members for giving me the opportunity to make my views known to the committee on behalf of a number of the residents. I think the committee has already gone through the technical aspects around flooding, around the issues of lack of infrastructure, the sporting history, the history of the site, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to dwell much on that. I just wanted to highlight 2 points for the benefit of the committee. Point number 1, this is a green space. We all talk about climate change. We all talk about mental health. This green space, once it's gone forever. It's never going to come. And we owe it to the future generations to ensure we are able to help them. Now is the time, not just to talk, but to walk the talk. We need to protect this particular space for future generations. The second point that I want to make, and it goes back to the history of the entire site. And over here, I'm trying to represent little people all around the world. We little people who are always following the rules and then see the mighty and the rich bend the rules on their whimsical will. If I, as a normal little person, was to apply for a planning permission and I was given conditions, if I go 1 centimeter wider or 1 centimeter higher, the whole force of regulation and the law would be on me, and very rightly so. In this case, we have got a very powerful and mighty organization who was granted permission to build a number of houses in 2010-11 on the condition that the field would be left for the use of community, for the use of sports. And as has been mentioned a few times by various people, they have very proactively tried not to engage with sports providers. I point to Beltway as well as the council officer citing a cost of 1.5 million that is required to develop the site for sports use. I had earlier today in the morning shared an email to the committee members from ECB and Surrey Cricket, who have given a fully funded business case to put in use this particular site for the benefit of community cricketing at a cost of £10,000, not 1.5 million. And that's a one-off £10,000 and an annual maintenance charge of £4,000. This particular site needs to come to the community. The future Stuart Broads, Joe Roots are right now probably in their nappies or just going to schools. we owe it to them that we don't lose this particular thing. If that's time, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Could I call now is it the Rains Park Residence Lawn Tennis Club representatives?
Chair,
ready?
we're speaking on behalf of the applicant. There's 3 of us speaking and we will share 6 minutes if that's okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Chair, are you happy for us to start? Good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name's Julian Goodban. I'm the Regional Planning Director for Beltway Homes, and I'm joined by Greg Evans of Savills and Phil Ryder from the local tennis club. In summary and in support of the application, the site has not been used for 22 years. Its repurpose will make a positive use of a vacant area of land, providing new and much needed housing. Although there is no requirement for Beltway to use the land for any purpose, the proposal combines a successful blend of housing, a significant area of open space, recreation, and publicly accessible sporting uses. In terms of the housing element, the scheme will provide 12% of Merton's 10-year housing target. It provides a good mix of apartments and family housing, with 41% of affordable homes provided, which is already stated is a unique position for the borough. All homes will meet accessibility and adaptability standards, with 10% being designed for wheelchair users. And we've included air source heat pumps, solar panels, and no gas boilers to generate a reduction of CO2 emissions by over 70%. A significant financial contribution to local services will also be secured. This includes a community infrastructure levy of over £2.66 million, plus a Section 106 contribution of £1.2 million. We're also pleased to hear that there have been over 78 letters of support for the application from local residents. If approved, Beltway will be committed and excited to bring forward such an important scheme to the borough. I'll now hand over to Greg and Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, officers and Merton, for working very cooperatively with Beltway over the last 2 years to address technical issues and refine this scheme for residential, sporting and recreation uses presented for approval this evening. Your emerging local plan allocates the site for other uses, including much needed housing, if the entire site is undeliverable for sporting or community use. Following investigation by the Playing Pitch Strategy Steering Group, the applicant and Merton Council, who directly contacted interested groups, your planning policy team have concluded that a sports use of the whole site is not deliverable. Therefore, in line with the emerging local plan, an alternative mix of uses on the site is acceptable, and officers confirm that the principle of residential use, complemented by 2 tennis courts open to the public, together with significant financial contributions for off-site sporting facilities, is acceptable. This scheme delivers 107 new homes of a range of sizes. Significantly, a policy-compliant 41% will be affordable. That's 44 affordable homes on site. Reprofiling of the site will ensure all the homes will not be at risk of flooding, and it will not increase the risk to others. This scheme meets the London Plan on urban greening factor. It is a landscape-led design with a central community space, shared surfaces, and new trees. Beltway listened to the feedback of the design review panel, and it worked positively with Merton's design officer to deliver this high-quality, sustainable scheme where people can live and all can enjoy. The Section 106 agreement provides about £960,000 for sports and recreation. This includes 2 tennis courts, a play area, mugger, trim trail, an outdoor gym, which is provided on site for use by all of the public. And about £610,000 will go for off-site sports pitch improvements. Officers conclude that the principle of residential development has been established and is acceptable. Accordingly, we respectfully request that members follow your officer's recommendation and approve this scheme to deliver much needed housing and provide a substantial financial package of benefits.
The tennis club has thrived since its relocation to the Meadowview Road site in 2013. Membership in that time has grown by 150%. The club has been able to offer the local community excellent and affordable facilities, a varied tennis program, and a friendly and welcoming environment. Our success in offering what the community wants has led to a point where our present premises are too small to meet the local demand. The membership numbers are such that it was becoming more and more difficult for players to get access to courts at the more popular times of the week. The Lawn Tennis Association has suggested a ratio of club members to tennis courts. That ratio is 1 court for 40 club members. Our club currently has far more members than this ratio would suggest. With some reluctance, therefore, in July 2021, the Tennis Club Committee decided that it had to close membership applications from adult tennis players. This decision rapidly led to the formation of a waiting list of adult players who wished to join the club. And by March 2022, that waiting list was around 60 people. The additional 2 courts proposed in this application will allow the club to further increase its membership, which will help to meet the very clear demand for tennis from the local community. The proposed tennis development will also allow for the introduction of pay and play tennis, which will meet the needs of those who do not wish to commit to annual membership of the club. We ask your committee if they will approve this application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your for comments. And now we're going to have contributions from councillor colleagues. So can I ask Councillor John Oliver to speak first?
Thank you. There are 3 of us to share the 9 minutes. I'm planning to talk a little bit about the planning framework. My colleague to the left, Robert Page, is going to talk about opportunities for the site, and Hina Bakari is going to talk about flooding and other resident concerns. She's on Zoom. So just to start with the planning framework, and this is largely repeating what's been said, but I think it's worth going over. There are 3 levels of planning framework: a national level, a regional level, a local level. The national view, as expressed in planning policy guidance, more recently renamed planning policy statements. The wording is the same. I'll just read it to you because it's worth reminding. Open space, sports and recreation facilities, public rights of way and local green space, heading. Existing open space, sports and recreational buildings and land, including playing fields, should not be built on unless. An assessment has been undertaken which has clearly shown the open space, buildings or land to be surplus to requirements. B, the loss resulting from the proposed development would be replaced by equivalent or better provision in terms of quantity and quality in a suitable location. And C, the development is for alternative sports and recreational provision, the benefits of which clearly outweigh the loss of the current or former use. So just to look at that, this clearly says there's a presumption in favor of not building on open space unless it's unnecessary. But we know from the local plan, which states that this site is in an area identified as being deficient in access to public open spaces, but that's not the case. Also, that the loss of space would have to be compensated by the delivery of improvements elsewhere. And you might argue that that justified the original granting of permission for the 44 dwellings, but not the development of the remaining site. And the third point, which isn't really relevant, is that the building could be allowed if it was connection with providing other sports or recreational facilities. That's not a relevant consideration. At the regional level, the London plan says similar things. I haven't got time to quote it at length, but for example, and the London plan has been adopted by the Secretary of State, so this is live. Policy G4, open space. Item 3, promote the creation of new areas of public accessible open space, particularly green space, ensuring that future open space needs are planned for. So again, the presumption is that open space should be protected and, where possible, expanded. The local framework, we have our current plan. The plan that's live at the moment was adopted in 2011, actually modified and finally finalized in 2014. A couple of quotes from that. Page 102, which relates to the Rains Park sub-area. It states, new housing developments will occur on previously developed land, period. Page 113.
John, are you passing on to your colleague?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the sports use, and particularly as the officer noted, the original Meadowview development was a enabling development. It should have resulted in a community asset. That was the clear intention from the planning officer at the time. Unfortunately, it appears the council, fluffed up the section 106 terms of this, and the community was denied the use of the space they were promised. This application only really exists because of that sort of error in the past. And, it's sort of a cruel trick that the road built was called Meadowview, given now the application to build on it. As noted, the applicant contends there's no viable sports use, but the fields have been fenced off, for over 10 years, preventing any organic, clubs and societies forming in the area. As noted, the space is in Merton's playing pitch strategy as a site for cricket, and there is high demand for additional cricket pitches in the borough. The flawed process to identify local clubs has already been discussed, but it's worth noting that Sport England described the financial requirements in the process as unreasonable and an onerous burden to place on local clubs and groups, and that such groups and clubs would not necessarily have the resource to risk on developing a master plan for a site they may never be offered. They described it as extremely unfair to conclude that the clubs and societies have not passed the policy test. And considering there is a credible bid from the Cricket Consortium, we don't feel the council has demonstrated this bid is not viable. The consortium has a range of flexible proposals, as John from the Residents Association noted, demonstrating how they can, use the pitches, with a range of different financial constraints, and they have deeply credible backers in the form of the ECB and the Surrey Cricket Foundation. Beltway's sports report into the use is also not, when you read it, it's not really credible. The justification for no need for new cricket pitches includes the comment that the main growth in cricket is in women's and girls' games, and these groups do not play on Saturdays. I do not understand how that comment can be justified. A more reasonable reason for the lack of playing on Saturdays would be the lack of pitches available to do so, given the existing men's teams already in operation. Similar claims exist for rugby and football. And when you consider, the new development Tesco, with the 456 home development, there's going to be even greater pressure on green space. And in particular, the offers of the parks and other facilities will be treated very skeptically by local residents, given the previous commitments to sports use have been totally ignored. So for that reason, we sort of urge the committee members to reject this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Over to Hina Bakari.
Thank you so much. I just want to commend my colleagues for presenting such a great argument against this application, and also to show my disappointment also to what I just heard from the developers, where they said there was a petition, 73 people who actually wanted the development. We looked into this, and actually the majority of those people don't live in West Barnes. This is the kind of approach that we have had with this developer from the very start. And when again and again and again, we see these kind of developers behaving in this way, which is why when we asked residents, and we didn't do a political letter, we did a very clear, please tell us your views, what do you think? And the responses that we got from all our residents was very clear that this was not right. They all were very clear on the fact that this was a promised land for sports, and that's exactly what we should be doing. The other thing is it is a loss of land, a green space. There's 3.009 hectares that's going to be lost. And to say that we're going to reduce CO2 emissions from a grassed field, just think about that. There is no logic to that argument to say that you're reducing carbon emissions. You are actually increasing it. That is the fact. You are making it more of a flood risk. And there are factors that you have explained, and I think there has been work to factor in those issues. But the problem is that lots of the people who we have heard from who approached the developer about making this a sports field were told categorically that it couldn't happen because it was a flood risk. And now it's not a flood risk because now they're going to put on all the work. So there is a mixed argument here. Either we can make this land viable or not. Yes, we can. And that's been proven by the fact that there have been all these initiatives and ways of making sure that there is more to help in terms of the flooding. It is a floodplain. There are lots of references that you've made in your presentation about how it is a flood risk. And I don't think I need to go into that any further. But there will be roads such as Westway and Greenway who have been flooded continually that are at risk. And the local infrastructure has already been threatened with 450 more dwellings from the Tesco site. We have got enough on our plate in West Barnes. And in terms of development and in terms of risk to more flooding, we haven't got capacity in our local schools, in our GPs, and the residents who spoke earlier with passion, but also with logic. They are absolutely correct. We cannot lose this green space because once it's gone, it's gone. And this is down to the failure of both the developer and the council. And I'm afraid that the council officers who set up this application, the promise of making sure it was for sports over 20 years ago, I'm sure they are absolutely furious too. If we can fix this wrong, let's make sure.
Thank you, Hina, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and speaking so passionately in relation to this application. I'll just ask Tim briefly, does he want to comment or reply to any of the particular themes that were raised?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have comments in particular. The only thing I wanted to mention was in relation to the carbon emissions and the reduction that Councillor Bakari mentioned. Obviously, the site is a green field at the moment. It has no carbon emissions. This is carbon reductions over what is required for any new dwelling under building control. So the planning policies require a certain amount of improvement over what is required anyway through building control. So yes, that as a development, it will produce carbon, but it is significantly less than would usually be the case for the creation of new dwellings. That was my only point of clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. So we'll open it to the floor for questions. I'll take them in batches of 3, and these are questions directly for Tim to answer. So we've got Matt, we've got Michael, and we've got Susie. So we'll go in that order.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tim. The Durham proposal that was refused and won on appeal, 08/P1869, that used 13% of the total area for an enabling development. How much of the total area is used now for residential?
Cool, Tim, if you won't. Mike.
Yes, just reading about the 500 hours access for community users. Is there a way we can increase this, and how would we go about doing so?
Susie. Susie? One question at a time, or 2 if needed, but thank you.
A couple. It's to do with capital viability. Looking at the new documents which we got today, back in September last year, when there was a marketing facility, this property was marketed without a price being given. Then in the sports justification report, which is at page 27 of the bundle that we've got now, it's apparent that capital contribution mattered. So it says that one of the factors considered was the ability of people to provide an indication of the willingness and ability to purchase the site or take out a very long lease. And then again, in the next paragraph, there is a discussion where Beltway came up with the figure of 1.5 million and said this included land costs. Now, I don't understand. It appears to me this was marketed on the basis that people could make offers. And then when it came to it, Beltway said, nobody can afford this. And I don't understand how those two things fit together. So what are land costs at page 27? What does it mean?
I think there's 3 fair questions. So to summarize, we've got reference to 08 to P1869, I believe. Yeah, 13%. And then Michael's point about the community access in relation to the previous agreement. And then Susie's point about on page 27, the sports justification report on capital.
Thank you, Chair. If I just share my screen to bring up the layout plan. I don't have a figure for you in terms of percentage of coverage. So I'm afraid you'll have to look at this in terms of proportions of the site. It depends if you count how you count the extent of it, but I would say a reasonable amount would be here. So it's likely to be margin around half or just over half of the site. I would hasten a guess, but I don't have a specific figure in terms of percentage of land coverage. Moving on to the next question. This is something we've responded to in the modification sheet. So that reference to 500 hours was a requirement if King's College had occupied this part of the site for sporting purposes back at the time of the original application, they would have been required to provide 500 hours of community use per year. So a little, an hour and a bit a day on average. That is part of the previous Section 106 agreement, the agreement that no longer bites because this land was never taken up and used in the way that was intended by the Section 106. So that 500 hours is historic and fallen to the wayside to some extent. The facilities which are being offered as part of this application would not be time limited in the same way. They would simply be provided for the public in perpetuity. In terms of capital viability, again, in question 2 on the modification sheet, we've come back with some comments on this. If Tara, my colleague who works in planning policy, would like to come back on anything in addition, I'd invite her to, but otherwise I would refer members to that response. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So do we have another round of questions? Okay, we've got, oh, hands, good. Matt, Dan, and then Tom.
Thank you. I promise not to be first every time. Okay, £325,000 was to go to the tennis from Beltway in total, including 45,000 to the sinking fund, 45,000 for fixing up the old courts to make that proposal viable. What was the proposed financial contribution by Beltway for the cricket consortium?
Could you just repeat that bit? What was the proposed financial contribution by Beltway for the cricket consortium bid? Thank you. Dan.
My question is about electrical vehicle charging points. I understand the London plan only requires 20% of spaces to be electrical, to be compatible for electrical vehicle charging. But given that by the time, if a decision is reached, if anything like this happens, it'll be sometime in the future, and by 2030 you won't be able to buy a petrol or diesel car. So is there any way that this figure could be increased and can be future-proof these parking spots?
Good question, Tom.
Thank you, Chair.
There seems contradictory information about the time limit on the current arrangements about sporting use. So the actual detail of the section 106 from the previous development doesn't seem to have a time limit on there. The Merton playing pitch strategy did put a time limit on finding a viable sporting use, but then the legal advice that we've seen from Sport England says that this doesn't count as planning policy, and also that the council's own local plan doesn't put a time limit on finding a viable sporting use. Are you able to clear that up, please? And in terms of that, as sort of as part of the answer, I suppose, if there were a viable proposal to come forward now, in a day, in a week, clearly before some sort of development has happened, what would be the course of action then? Or does this planning application sort of have we now reached the finish point if this is approved and the sort of sporting use is gone?
So some good questions there. So working backwards, Tom, I think is about where does that test, where does that time limit finish? Dan, good point about the electrical charge and the future proofing. I think Matt's question was more in jest about how much funds was provided by Beltway to the cricket consortium.
I don't ask questions in jest, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So all the section 106 contributions and costs are set out in the report. Clearly, there is no contribution from Beltway to a third-party group for use of the land. So I think that was the question, but no, there is no contribution. In terms of electric vehicle charging, this is a key matter, and as the member says, it is something that future-proofing is important for with the uptake in electric cars. Unfortunately, we can't act a step ahead of the policy. So whilst the policies will be looking to respond to trends, and we're in a climate change emergency, this is going to be top of the agenda. But as it stands, we have no basis in planning policy to insist on a greater provision. In terms of the timeline for sporting use, yes, the playing pitch strategy included a time limit. The site allocation does not include a time limit. It simply sets out it needs to be shown that there is not a deliverable sports use. When we carried out our own consultation exercise and sending out questionnaires, we initially offered 21 days. That eventually stretched to 4 months whilst we were still trying to get information out to the various groups as to what their offers were going to be. So the time limit of the play and pitch strategy related to the use of the pitch, the site, but it's not, it doesn't go over and beyond anything else. If we could find a viable proposal for a sporting use, then that would be the position that we'd look for the site to take. That would be a material consideration in this assessment. If, however, in 2 years' time, if this application were granted and in 2 years' time a scheme comes in, then of course we would have missed the boat effectively. But there is no time limit from that point of view in terms of identifying whether there is a deliverable sports use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Last round, unless there's any further questions. First one from me. I mean, we've heard a lot tonight, some figures banded around, particularly about the cricket consortium, £10,000 here, or potentially other bids as well. Do we have an idea of what actually viability looks like in terms of that site as sporting use? We've got some references of over £1 million, but what does it actually look like? What works do actually need to be required? Because on the spectrum of the ask from reading the papers, we've got perceptions that viability is opening up for the weekend for sort of independent sports clubs to use versus building pavilions, stadiums and tracks. So it would kind of be helpful to understand where the investigations went there and the realistic viability in actually constructing and the physical works needed for that type of thing. Are there two more questions from the panel? We've got Jill and Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So I have two very short questions. First one is cost implication to the potential residents of affordable housing. There is clearly a huge amount of land that's going to require maintenance and care. There is a cost implication. Is Beltway anticipating passing any of those costs on to future owners or tenants? Second question is, I am still extremely unconvinced by the plan for the flood prevention or amelioration, given that the site apparently slants downwards. I'm concerned that the residents at the lower end of the development, who probably already suffer with flooding, I'm sure, are going to be at greater risk and greater exposure. And I would request that if this plan is granted, that we in fact place a very hard condition upon providing more than the basic minimum for flood prevention.
Thank you. And lastly, Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, with the green space on the site, you're saying that it's going to be available for residents and for the public, but obviously you've got 2 tennis courts, which that they are only going to be available to the tennis club members. You've got the children's playground as well, which is only going to be available for children, naturally. You've got the gym, which again is not something that's going to be suitable for an awful lot of people. So how much of the green space is going to be left for the rest of the community, as it were?
Thank you very much. So working backwards, green space utilisation across age brackets. Jules, 2 points about flood prevention. Sorry, 3 points. What conditions can we put in terms of flood prevention as well, in excess of what's already been recommended, Tim? And also a really important one actually about the ongoing revenue costs for the affordable tenants. And my point about what does realistically here, what does good look like on this site from a sports perspective, and how are we judging that in terms of our previous viability?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of viability, I'll pass over to Tara Butler, my colleague in planning policy, and I'll do that in just a moment. In terms of the cost implication in terms of affordable housing and any maintenance on site, this is a good point. It's not something that is a material planning consideration, and we cannot include it as part of the assessment. So we don't know what any future service charges may be, and we have no position to demand it or assess it, I'm afraid. It is out of our hands. In terms of the flood mitigation, as indicated, the runoff on site will be reduced. So flooding to the south where it's lower should be less than in the existing situation. Again, with any policies, we can encourage the applicant to go above and beyond, and on a number of aspects they have been able to do so. The runoff rate is being reduced from 13 litres a second to around 6, which is already a significant betterment. So whilst I do understand the concern around flooding, and particularly if you've seen your own garden flood, the road outside your house flood, and now they're proposing to build on the land which you consider as the floodplain, I can understand the need for the concern. As it stands, we've had our flood risk officer, who represents the local flood authority, and the Environment Agency consider the details in great depth. So we don't have a policy requirement to impose anything more than that has been proposed already. In terms of green space being available to the public, the tennis courts would also be available on a pay and play system. The multi-use games area would be available, well, they'd all be available to anyone. If there's people who don't want to use those facilities, and it also provides some parkland for walking around. I suppose the key point is that it's a well-equipped area of open space, which would provide a range of needs for a range of members of society. I'll now pass over to Tara to come back on the question about viability. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. it's clear that the length of time this application's been going on for and the number of sporting organisations involved, that there's a range of costs that could be used for its deliverability, Chair. A couple of basic points. With our assessment of the use of the site for sporting uses, we took 2 points from Merton's playing pitch strategy as written. It's worth saying Merton's playing pitch strategy was prepared in conjunction with Sport England and all the national governing bodies for sport, cricket, rugby, hockey, football and tennis. And that group steered the strategy, Sport England, those groups and the council all the way through, and we still have meetings about its deliverability. So the costs that are in the strategy are derived from Sport England costs, which are agreed with the national governing bodies. There's 2 basic points that the playing strategy, pitch strategy recommends, and that comes from the bodies for sport, and that is recommendation G4, that sites need ancillary and changing pavilions, and recommendation G5, that sites need pitches need drainage. So they are the basic minimum. We wouldn't see a new pitch developed without toilets and drainage effectively to make it playable. And those 2 are the minimum issues we looked at. In the back of Merton's playing pitch study, there are a wide range of costs based on Sport England's provision. There's nothing specific worked up for this particular site involving the exact consortium. So where it comes to people who have, when we contacted the council, the bodies to get the information, we assumed that they were providing accurate costs for their own sporting needs. I'll give you some examples from the playing pitch study. One is at a site called Farm Road. It's to provide a cricket pitch installation, including a drainage scheme. The cost given by the ECB and Sport England is 300,000. There are other cricket-based costs in the study. Most of them are over 100,000. There are a couple of refurbishment costs of existing facilities, like a refurbishment of a pavilion, which came in at 20,000, but it gives an idea of the range and extent of costs. Finally, we, as my colleague Tim said, and in light of the representations received on the application, which cast quite a lot of doubt on whether or not sporting groups would be able to engage with the applicant, we took it upon ourselves to write directly to the sporting organisations. We did that in August 2021. We're saying that the national governing bodies for rugby and cricket have visited the site and accompanied in February 2020 as well. In August 2021, we wrote to all the sporting bodies. As Tim said, we kept chasing this up, and I think the last chaser we sent was in December 2021. The costs provided by the consortium includes proposed plans that they costed of over £1 million, but they had a £300,000 budget to contribute to that.
Thank you very much. So I'm just conscious, is anyone who would like to speak who hasn't already asked a question? Ed.
Thank you, Chair. If we go with the playing pitch strategy, it does say we're short of pitches. Is it now, I mean, what precedent does this set if we start building on green space like this? Are we going to, I mean, one of the reasons I think for families to move to Merton is the fact that we have green space. We know that since COVID, it's important to get out for physical and mental health, the benefits of playing team sports. This just seems an opportunity that once it's gone, it's gone.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I think the way I'd want to answer that question is that it's very clear that as planning decision makers, that we must treat each application on its own individual merits. So I would not I would not be considering this to be setting a precedent. I know there's an issue of principle here. We've heard about, well, what if, you know, the situation with sports clubs in the area changes over time? As a planning committee, you will be asked to make decisions based essentially on what is a snapshot in time. Providing that an application has been through the due process and you're satisfied with the merits of that particular case, then you should be able to vote for approving the application without fear of setting a precedent elsewhere. It will always depend on the particular planning circumstances of every site and every case, of which two are never the same. So I do feel that the committee could make a positive conclusion here without being concerned about the loss of further green space for this type of development proposal.
Thank you very much, John. I'd like to move now to comments and general observations. But before I do, I did promise to stop around now for a break, unless, how does everyone feel? Does everyone feel okay? Good, we continue, good, fantastic. Everyone at the back, okay? Great, fantastic. All right, so comments and general observations. Anyone make a shout? Please make them brief. Matt, Tom, Matt goes first.
Thank you, Chair. They may have left Rains Park Residents Lawn Tennis Club to last when speaking in support of the application, but they were in fact the first engaged by Beltway. The officer said there was no financial agreement to a third party, but to all the other sort of sporting organisations, that's exactly what the tennis is. If the committee votes in support tonight, the actual tennis courts will be provided at the end of the final housing development phase that's in the documents. So this is in part to allow the site to be used in the interim in the main construction compound, but also at the crest of the tennis club because the construction dust damaging the new courts. I think in this room there's a lack of trust that that would be done considering what happened in previous times. So the Beltway Agreement is from the 24th of June 2020 with the Lawn Tennis Club. And it says that the tennis club is happy to accept the proposals that Beltway outlined at the meeting held in June 2020 and published in August, that it meets the club's needs and the club agrees to support this element of a planning application. So therefore, public support for the application was always part of the agreement for the Lawn Tennis Association to get the funding to and the courts. Paragraph 7.1.25, which has been added in our agenda, is the marketing process started on the 16th of July 2020 and ended on the 16th of September 2020. So clearly that is after the agreement was already in place with the tennis. And so there has never been an equal playing field for any other sport if you read those documents as it states. So I'm not going to talk down the £1 million investment from Beltway. And thank you for all of your work over the last 2 years because this application is infinitely better than the previous one. But I am minded to vote against the application. This may be voted through today by Planning Application Committee, but we should acknowledge then that no such offer was made for any proposal that was not already agreed in June 2020. So the Haslam's image in our supplementary agenda confirms that the closing date of September 2020 was the date for all the other sporting groups to come forward, but it was already in writing that it would be the tennis. So the chair said that we'll be creating things that last beyond our lifetime. Hopefully I'm still alive in 2030, but I brought this along because I was reading this morning, the My Merton, and on page 9, the council consulted what you told us, things we value, open spaces, our ambitions for improvement, maximising our green spaces. I think we have it there.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to the time limit point, really, because I don't really feel that it was answered in a way that sort of, I guess the question is sort of why now? You know, we've got this planning application in front of us now, but I don't think, you know, there are still clearly national and local sporting bodies that are wanting to continue the conversation about the sporting use of the field. I'd understand to some extent if Sport England, the ECB, local cricket clubs, the consortium had all said, yeah, fair enough, you know, we've been to see the site, we've done the costings, you know, and these are obviously, you know, well-established organisations. You know, the ECB, Sport England, they won't just throw numbers around or throw money at things for the sake of it. If they are backing bids in terms of the ECB, then surely they'd have a good idea of what they were doing. You know, they've done this 1,000 times before. This is their specialism. They clearly know what they're doing. And I think the fact that there's still local clubs
and with sort of clear sort of national credible backing that are saying that there is still an opportunity to use these fields. It seems very odd. It seems an odd time to now be ending the conversation. I think, as the officer said in their answer, it's sort of now or never in some ways in the sort of sporting sense, because if the development gets approved and the development goes ahead, then that's the end of the conversation when it comes to the sporting use, and there won't be anything to replace it, and clearly nothing will be happening on this site in terms of sporting use. Councillor Foley mentioned precedent. I think that the precedent isn't necessarily just for this committee. I understand the point that we have to take individual decisions, but I think we've seen in the papers that the council officers have acknowledged, residents have been clear that they think that Beltway has behaved appallingly, and the precedent that we're at risk of is that you have terms that are set out to you, and you then over time find a way to show why those terms aren't deliverable anymore, and then you're able to come back with something different. The reason the field hasn't been used for 10, 15, 20 years is because it has a fence around it. The fence is there because Beltway's put the fence there. I think it's to now regard it as just redundant land, because you've got a developer that all sporting bodies, local residents, council officers are acknowledging haven't behaved in the best possible way when it comes to facilitating offers or even ideas that are coming forward to fulfill the terms that they had from their previous planning application. It sort of shows it's a dangerous precedent for other developers to come along and think, well, we've got something green space as part of one of our applications, so we'll fence that off in 10, 15 years time. We can change the conversation, or lots of other different ways. I think, as I say, I think my main point is struggling about the timing now. I think that some of the dates that have been mentioned, the sort of council's questionnaire going out around sort of December 2021. We had the 3-month marketing campaign from Beltway that I think was July till September 2020. I think we need to acknowledge that there was other things going on for these 2 years that this conversation was happening. Most of these sports clubs and their members were probably just trying to keep their head above water. So I think holding them to something, to not being quite as responsive as they might have otherwise been, or not being able to put together coherent business plans or ideas when most of these are sort of small organisations with sort of national backing. It seems, as I say, a very odd timing to now be saying, right, we're taking sort of any possible sporting use off the table because you haven't sort of jumped through the hoops for the last couple of years, and despite the fact that there's still people that are keen to see sporting use on here, and clearly, as we've seen from the comments, the neighbouring community want to see that as well. It seems a very odd time to now be saying, no, sorry, that's the end of the conversation. We're going a different way.
Thank you very much. So these are comments, yeah? Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Mundy. I have obviously considered this application very closely, and I have considerable concerns about it because I do believe that sporting uses could potentially still be delivered on this site. I think it's appalling that there was a botched Section 106 agreement back in 2009-10, March 2020 of previous administration in Merton. But I have seen evidence emerging that there is sporting potential uses of this site. And I obviously note with interest in terms of the representation of the ECB, but also as well Sport England. As a council, we do need to deliver more homes. We do need to deliver affordable homes, and obviously I welcome that this is policy compliant and it is 40%. So I've racked my brains over it, but I recognise as well, if we gave the go-ahead for this application, this site is lost forever, and I don't believe that the evidence presented tonight has been convincing in my own view in terms of passing this application. Thank you.
And Susie.
Can I just endorse everything which has been said by others in front of me and add to it simply this: if this was a brownfield site, having looked at it, the new application is a vast improvement on what went before. If this was a brownfield site, I wouldn't be arguing, but looking at it, this is an open green space. And on my phone, I have flashed up today a message which came from Merton Council, leader Ross Garrett has been visiting the borough's sports clubs after the council confirmed its first ever dedicated cabinet role to improving sports development. After everything we've heard tonight about what is still possible and what has not been done, I do not feel that I can support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've heard, so we're going to proceed to a vote. So we've heard a lot tonight, a lot of passions from residents and informed views from officers. I've not added my own comments to this as well. I think my view is that the reality is that this site has stayed vacant for a number of years, and it will likely to continue to stay vacant unless it is utilised for the benefit of the community. And that benefit does clearly include sporting use, but it also includes the benefit of housing. And we are in a housing crisis, and we need to attract positive developments that fulfill both the needs of the future with green, but also attracts a diverse range of residents to new areas. And while we have to respect the views of existing residents, we also need to understand and be mindful of the future residents who have the opportunity to take part and enjoy the area that the current residents do take a much pride and love and joy in. So my view tonight would be I'll be voting in favour of this application, because while there are several concerns we've raised outside of this through our technical briefing and tonight, I'm confident that they've been addressed both in the sense of the continued commitment with the local tennis club, but also with the open access to all the facilities, in addition to the wider financial contribution to sport across the borough, contribution to further enjoyment by residents, young and old. So that's my comment on this. So we're going to go to a vote as on the order paper. So the paper recommendation is to grant permission subject to conditions and 106 legal agreement. Can I have those hands in favour of support?
For, Chairman.
Can I have those against?
6, Chairman.
And the application is denied.
Chairman, just to conclude matters, could I just clarify with the committee, because there's this is an overturn of the recommendation, so we need to be clear when we issue the decision notice on the reason for refusal. Would the committee be satisfied that there is one reason for refusal, and that is that the loss of open space and potential sporting facilities outweighs the benefits of the other benefits that the scheme would bring in terms of affordable housing, etc.? Is the committee happy with that solitary reason being put forward to the applicant?
Is that the will of the 5 councillors? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I would like my name added for those who voted in favour. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for those in the back. Thank you for those speaking. We will take a 5-minute break and scratch that. Take 10-minute break. We're back at 9:10. We're going to restart in 2 minutes. Sorry, everyone. My computer's having a bit of a panic, so I'm just going to the backup option. So thank you everyone for returning. Apologies for the slight delay. So we are now going to be taking item 11. So that's the Rufus business site. If I can ask Tim to introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application site is known as Rufus Business Centre. It is within the Wimbledon Park district of the borough. The application site is accessible via an access road from the north, which currently serves now a new development, which was known as the former Hazelmere Industrial Estate. To the northwest of the site is a cul-de-sac known as Dawlish Avenue, which comprises 2-storey residential dwellings. To the south is known as a site called Wellington Works, which is light industrial units, and to the east is the railway line. The existing Sorry, by way of introduction, you will see on page 358 that the application has been before Planning Committee in February this year, as well as March this year, both times deferred for the reasons therein. Also draw your attention to the appendixes 1 to 4, which we've put in here in full for your information. The existing site comprises largely 3-story business units with the access as existing from the north. The proposal itself is for a full redevelopment of the site to provide 96 residential flats and also 880 square meters of office co-working accommodation at ground floor level. The flats, there would be 55 one-bedroom flats, 37 2-bed and 4 3-bed. The proposal has been accompanied with a viability report, and the agreed affordable housing provision is 8 London affordable rents, which are to be situated in Block D within the site. The proposed layout, you can see here, takes the form of 4 blocks of accommodation, blocks A to D. You have Block A here, B here, and C here, which steps down towards the existing neighbouring properties, and then Block D here, which is a proposed 3-story affordable housing block. In terms of the ground floor, as I said, a new access road which would tie in with the existing one from the recent development to the north. There would be no gate between that development and this one, so it'd simply be an open street. You would have a large turning head here, so for servicing, and particularly the refuse vehicle can come in a forward gear and leave in a forward gear. There'll be 3 disabled parking spaces here, and some additional parking spaces here, including a car club membership parking space. Very much a linear style development in terms of buildings, taking into account the type of site it is and its constraints. The commercial space would be at ground floor level, along with relevant servicing, storage, and cycle storage for the residential. The scheme does allow for an access should it become available in the future here. Just to point out that this access here would not be open until such a time as if there was coming forward in the future a link through to the park, Durnsford Recreation Ground. Some site photographs. So the buildings on site, the 1980s development, as I said, 3-story. This is a view from further down, looking at the new buildings that have been completed, and you can just see the site in the background there. A view across from the recreation ground. This was taken a few months back now, but that development you can see with the crane is in Wandsworth district. That is actually nearing completion now, I believe, and the site is beyond the tree line here. There's a bit of a closer up view. You can just see part of the building on site at the moment. This is actually taken from the back of the site, where there's the access track with Wellington Works and Dawlish Avenue. So the proposal includes a future-proofing the potential, if any, access through across this access track into the park, and that would be here. Just further views into the site here. These are the nearest neighbouring residential properties here. There's 40A and 40B Dawlish Avenue. And this is the view just from the very northern part, just showing some redevelopment in the local area on the entranceway on the right-hand side. Going through some of the floor plans. So the residential units, each given a linear form of development, each unit would be dual aspect, so all 96 units, which is a significant benefit to the scheme. The proposal also includes the use of external walkways to the majority of the units to provide for own front door access. Jumping straight to the roof plan. So we come to the elevations, you'll see that there's various flatted roofs which are to be utilized for communal outdoor space. Each flat does also have its own private outdoor terrace / balcony. Turning to elevations, so the scheme currently at the northern end would marry up with the height of the development just completed, and then it would step up 2 stories as it goes along. This is the view from the railway track side. In terms of materials, it'd be a contrasting difference in facing brick. So it's a facing brick building. Views, so from within the site itself, this is block C, which would step down as it goes west across the site. To help mitigate the impact of the visual impact of the wall here, it's going to be a green wall proposed on this side here. And as referred to before, these stepped bits are communal terraces for everyone to use. This is the elevation that would essentially face Durnsford Road Recreation Ground. So as I said before, we stepped access down. We have conditioned for landscaping and details which would be imposed on top of the communal terraces. The idea is from a view, you would potentially see a mixture of planting to help with the visual impact. Balconies here facing the recreation ground. It does actually staggers away, so it's not just a flat line here. Turning to the western side, so from within the site itself, as you can see, there's various pinch points here and help breaking up the bulk and mass. You'll see within the report that amended plans were submitted to assist with some of the Urban Design Officer's comments in terms of adding a bit more variety, breaking up some bulk and mass here, just to help give it some visual interest. Block D is to be here. You'll see on plan it's similar in height to the 3-story buildings on the neighbouring site, largely taking a similar approach as these buildings are the closest to the neighbouring occupiers to the west at Dawlish Avenue. Some 3D visuals submitted with the application to assist, really just showing some of the design. Again, a view from across the park, from within the site again, and then looking at the front of Block D. At the front, there's to be communal landscaping and walkways. Although the buildings are raised, there is disabled access provision for each of the blocks with level access as well as stairs, and also an outdoor lift. At the very back, which is a private access way to the Dawlish Avenue houses, this is how they envisaged the design. So as I said, it's proposed for a green wall here, and then those roof terraces go away. So as the building gets, as you see, taller here, it goes up, it steps away. Some flats benefit from large outdoor terrace areas such as here and here, but that's just part of the design. So the tallest part of the building would be in this corner here at 8 stories. Close-up view of some of the units. As I said, dual aspect through. Each core would have lifts, appropriate staircases. Again, some color plans to assist. So in terms of the considerations for this evening, Chair, the application has been before committee twice now for the reasons, and deferred for the reasons set out. Hopefully you will see in the report that we've sought to address those reasons in consultation with the applicant submitting some additional information. And so overall, Chair, officers recommend permission be granted subject to conditions and Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And absolutely take your point that this has been deferred on more than one occasion. At the same time, I'm conscious that this is constituted as a new committee. So while colleagues in previous, while the previous chair continually restricted the terms of questioning, I think it's fair, given that we've not had the chance to actually ask questions, that we can open up. It doesn't mean, obviously, that the answers aren't already there. So it's more asking your forgiveness, Tim, to reciting questions you've probably answered several times before. So if we go to speakers, so if I can have Chris Beach speak first, please.
And I'm taking Andre's slot as well, so it's 6 minutes. I request the application is refused for the following reasons: lack of transparency, failure to maximise development in Merton, social segregation, mass and height, urban greening. Lack of transparency. The estimated build costs for this development are extremely high and being used by the developer to justify features which the community strongly object to, such as excessive height, bulk, and no road link to Wellington Works. A key part of the high costs are the abnormal costs associated with site remediation. However, we have no independent view on these costs. Many of the abnormal costs were extrapolated from the adjacent Hazelmere estate without any on-site investigation at Rufus. Para 12.5 of the PAC reports states that on-site intrusive investigation has now taken place in April-May 22. We are told the results of this investigation are that hotspots of radiation were encountered. However, I do not believe the developer has provided the results of the investigation for review, how much radiation was actually encountered and where exactly. The developer has said the whole site will be excavated and remediated down to a depth of 500 mil at a cost of £1.5 million. This is not standard practice. We need to see the results of the investigation to see if this is justified. There's a severe lack of transparency. We are not being provided with the information that was specifically requested by this planning committee. To justify such a huge abnormal cost, the developer needs to provide the actual evidence. 2, failure to maximise development. In order to maximise residential development in the area, both Rufus and the adjacent Wellington Works site must be developed to full potential. The only way to develop Wellington Works to full potential of circa 24 units is to provide vehicle access through Rufus. If not, then Wellington will not be developed at scale, as it has had 3 planning applications rejected due to unsafe access provisions. The Rufus developer has stated that a new road through Rufus is possible, but their analysis has concluded it is not economic. However, the analysis is severely flawed. The cost of vehicle access through Rufus can be significantly reduced. The road does not need to be 8.5 metres wide. It does not need to run through the middle of the site. It does not need to be 20 miles an hour. Making the road narrower and lower speed will make it work. None of these options were studied. The developer states that if the alternative access to Wellington via Dawlish Avenue is widened to 5.6 metres instead, it will work for cars, pedestrians and cyclists. But if it works for Dawlish, why not for Rufus? Please note that widening access from Dawlish would require knocking down our homes. It is not feasible. Costs for the road link could also be accommodated by a reduction in the massively inflated remediation estimate. A petition for the road link has now been signed by 465 people, up from 350 when it was originally submitted. The proposal should be rejected and redesigned for vehicle access through Rufus. If not, then this committee will fail in its objective to maximise development in Merton. Segregation. The PAC agenda notes that all affordable housing is still planned to be in Core D. The planning officers are claiming it would be preferable to have the affordable housing in one block, but it is not a necessity. They have stated there will be cost benefits from shared maintenance and heating. However, there is no quantification of these benefits. These could be very marginal. However, the social costs will be huge. No consideration has been given to the social costs of imposing this segregation. It will promote division in the community and risks stigmatizing those living in the affordable block. This is social segregation. It is unacceptable. The application should be rejected and affordable housing redistributed and integrated across the development. Scale and mass and height. Scale, mass and height of the proposal is excessive and not in keeping with the surrounding area of 3-storey houses. Merton's urban design officer stated that the form and massing do not relate well to the adjacent development to the north, and the overall feel is of overdevelopment. The development received 27 objection letters together with a petition signed by over 400 people. Only 1 letter of support was received, and even this letter objected to the height and recommended reducing it to 6 stories. The green spaces describe the development as a monstrosity, which will be overpowering for the Durnsford Recreation Ground, one of the few open spaces in the area. The officer's recommendation states that the taller elements of the proposal are a good level of separation away from the neighbours to ensure there is low loss of amenity. This is not true. The level of separation is less than 50 metres and the taller elements are 8 stories. There will be a huge loss of amenity for neighbours. We will have reduced sunlight, be overlooked and have a highly imposing 8-storey block adjacent to our properties. I propose reducing the height of the development to 6 stories in line with the adjacent Earlsville Place. Urban greening. I also object on the basis of inadequate urban greening. LBM feedback on the Rufus pre-application was that urban greening is essential to make the development acceptable because it is so overbearing. However, the level of urban greening contained in the current plan does not even meet GLA minimum standards. In section 11.8, officers ask us to note the existing site lacks greening and therefore the current proposal would be an improvement. This is highly misleading. The current site is 3 stories high. It is not visible for miles around. It does not overshadow or overlook neighbouring properties or a recreation ground as the proposed development will. The lack of urban greening on this highly imposing development should be a reason for a refusal. Height should be reduced and greening increased to improve local amenity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can I now call Barry Newman, please?
Good evening. I'm the project manager for this application and have been involved in every aspect of the design and all of the associated considerations. I attended the two previous planning committees whereby the same matters raised by tonight's objectors were previously made. As you are a new committee, you may not be aware that these objections were not considered to be material considerations by your officers or by the former committee members. The main thrust of the concerns of the previous members, which led to the deferrals, was focused on the affordable housing contribution caused entirely by the nature of the contamination and the associated financial implications. Lots of questions were asked, which were not easy for officers to explain, as these are very complex matters. I'm here tonight to try to make this easy for you to understand, as we had the same radioactive contamination on the adjacent site, which we built out following stringent remediation controls imposed by the Environment Agency. The actual costs of cleaning up the adjoining site were £4 million. This in turn enabled us to accurately forecast the associated remediation costs for this site in order to attain the required certification from the Environment Agency. In other words, for a clean bill of health. The contamination was historically caused by the presence of an element called thorium-232, which was used in the previous manufacture of gas mantles on site. Presumably, little was known about the radioactive nature of thorium at that time. Since the last committee, we've undertaken further borehole analysis, which was passed on to your officers. And albeit the results are awaited, this confirms that the contamination is spread across the entire site. The heat maps included in the report provided clearly show the areas of contamination with very high values of radioactive elements below ground. However, the only way we will ever know how much is there will be to demolish it and then deal with all the remediation. And until that happens, our costs can only really be estimated. Given the estimated levels of contamination, members will no doubt want to see this site cleaned up, as do we. All major planning applications require a financial viability assessment, an FVA, which is prepared by experts. This includes all estimated construction costs and estimated sales revenues, and also factors in the necessary timelines involved. The council then retain the services of their own independent expert so they can obtain a professional opinion about the acceptability of the FVA which we submitted. In the event that a site attracts justifiable abnormal construction costs, then planning policy permits those costs to reduce the quantity of affordable housing required on site. Radioactive costs are considered to be an abnormal cost, as there are very few sites with that type of contamination. In the event that the site cannot deliver a policy compliant amount of affordable housing, then this automatically brings into play what's called a late stage FVA review. Such a review is actually based on the actual costs and actual revenues and not estimated figures. Normally, the late stage review occurs when sales of the completed scheme have achieved the 75% level. Our submitted FEA for this site calculated we could only afford to deliver 8% on site for affordable housing. This in turn was reviewed by the council's retained experts. Although they didn't accept all of our estimated abnormal cost table, they did agree with the recommendation to provide 8% initially. Our offer therefore constitutes the entire residential content of Block B, whereby all of those units will be for London affordable rent. Whilst we would like to offer more affordable housing, there is no way of knowing what the actual cost of remediation will be until after those works have been completed. Generally, normal construction costs have increased recently, and no doubt there will be some growth in sales revenue as well. The late stage review will capture all of those costs and revenue changes, which again will be reviewed by the council's retained experts. Under normal circumstances, any surplus identified in the late stage review is paid as a contribution to the council, whereby the local authority gets 60% of the surplus. However, in this instance, we're prepared to provide additional affordable housing units on site in the event of a sufficient surplus being generated. These would be shared ownership units in Block A, which really dispenses of the myth with the social lack of integration. We would also accept this happening after 50% of sales have been achieved instead of 75%. Indeed, the GLA have agreed on a mechanism for this, which we have shared with your officers, so it does work. The overall scheme designs were the subject of 2 pre-applications, one with the GLA and the other with Merton Council. The GLA were actually supportive of a design for 3 additional stories, but we felt it important to listen to the needs of the local authority in this respect. And once the height was reduced, Merton officers were also very supportive. Our design, which officers agree is of a high quality, will also increase the on-site employment numbers over and above the levels currently within the existing accommodation. Housing associations insist on having a separate entrance for rented units, which assists in mitigating their management costs. However, our designs are tenure blind insofar as that shared amenity spaces for all the entrances and common parts of each block are identical to one another. And the affordable units are located very close to the parking and the other amenities.
Barry, can I ask you to close now?
Yeah, I've got about 2 lines. The design of the building, fabric of the affordable homes and measures to create a building close to zero carbon ensures that the associated energy costs are minimized. This is important and helps deal with the climate change crisis and the current cost of living. So it's up to you. We can deliver new homes and new jobs on clean land with your approval tonight.
Cool. Thank you very much. Tim, is there anything you would like to reply on that? I would be interested to learn a bit more about the Block A addition.
Yes, thank you, Chair. To respond to some of the points raised. So the site is contaminated. Since the previous committee decision, the applicant has actually gone on site and done some further borehole testing. It's the same developers who did the site next door, which has been completed. We have provided that extra information for you within the committee agenda. In terms of potential road link through the site to the Wellington Works site, this has been explored with the applicant at pre-application stage. However, this has not been forthcoming. It would likely result in a reduction in units on the site and the blocks having being separated. Further, this is not a mandatory requirement. There is no policy requirement for it. Having the affordable housing in Block D, we do consider this to be a positive. It is only 8 units proposed. The Housing Association has written in explaining the benefits of this and the necessity for it. At Merton, we often get affordable housing provided on schemes which is far less than this. Now, the danger is, should a scheme like this with 8 units be scattered around the entire development, the registered provider may pull out and it may not attract anyone else to take them on. So that is our stance on having affordable housing in a separate block. Scale of massing, that is a matter of judgment. So clearly it will affect some of the outlook from the recreation ground, but it is in the northeast corner of the recreation ground. We consider the design and scale to be acceptable. With regards to Block A, in terms of the potential for some flats to become shared ownership following the late stage review, this would be supportive by us, but as we would always want affordable housing on the ground rather than a financial contribution. But the details of that would only come out much further down the line within the 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to open up the floor to questions. So I'll take 3 at a time like I did before. Who wants to go first? Got Martin, Dan, and Susie. Martin.
My question obviously is in relation to 7.5.22 in terms of the independent viability assessment and alter. Obviously, that did assess the affordable housing element which was submitted for this application, and it believed that 8 affordable units was the right amount. Was there any parts of this which was actually challenged on it? And can you also as well further explain the late review mechanism to the committee? And my other point on relation to affordable housing, obviously there is concerns about poor doors from many housing associations. It's certainly never been my view, and I was a cabinet member previously, that we should be having separate. I would like to see integrated, and it's regrettable that obviously housing associations are having this policy. I think it is wrong, but obviously I think I would be obviously interested to know what correspondence did come from Paragon on that matter.
Thank you, Dan.
I have 3 questions, Chair. Shall I ask them all at once or just one at a time?
Are they brief?
Sure. Okay. The first one's about the pepper potting of the affordable housing. What consideration was given to the idea that the service charge could be split proportionally and equitably between the residents? Why, in the evidence provided by PA Housing, they said it's simply because of service charge and costs. There are ways to manage this. What consideration was given to that? My second question is with regards to the affordable housing association. What happens if they go bust? Will we be able to find a new provider, mandate a new one be found? What protections are in place to ensure that the affordable housing will be delivered? And my third question relates to paragraph 7.5.17. I note in terms of the mix, with plenty of 1-bedroom properties and no 3-bedroom properties, I note the sentence, market experts confirm very little interest in 3-bedroom flats. What were these market experts, and are they still in business? And I note the letter that was given to us by affordable housing. They said there's a huge amount for 3-bedroom properties in Merton. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect here.
Thank you, Susie.
Sorry, I have 3, but they're all very short. There's an email from one of the ward councillors. There's concern with local residents about the security fencing at the end of the Undercroft in relation to Dawlish Avenue. And the suggestion has been made that a brick wall, rather than security fencing, would prevent tormenting the residents and provide rather more security, made less open to abuse. Could that be made a condition? That's the first one. Secondly, the children who are going to be in the affordable housing block, separate from the main blocks with the roof garden, are they going to have access to it, and can that be guaranteed? And the last one is the green wall, which anybody who's been watering their plants will have sympathy with. Can we have a condition that it's maintained, or is that already built in? Those are the 3. Thank
Cool.
you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So just to in reverse order. So generally about access and maintenance costs. Firstly, so the green wall, who pays for it? Who keeps it going? Who has access to the roof garden? Is that tenure blind? And then the wall or fence. Obviously, with Dan's point about affordable housing pepper potting and the contradictory statement in the sense of the letter arguing for high market demand for bigger units, whereas in the paper it states the complete opposite for not providing 3 beds. And Martin's point about the viability assessment is kind of linked into Dan's point in the sense of the level on the type of housing, and about challenge, and it mentions about poor conditions of housing too, but it'd be good to maybe take that point separately because I've got a point to add on that in the next round.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and do it in order. In terms of the viability assessment challenge, yes. So our consultants, I mean, the application's been in now, I think, nearly over a year. There has been back and forth between them and us. So in terms of the challenge, yes, that's correct. You'll see in paragraph 7.5.23 that there was some discrepancy between the council's assessor and what the applicants were saying in terms of costs. I think it was some 200,000 difference. We have applied our figure in terms of that within the viability assessment. In terms of the late stage review mechanism, I've put members within the report the definitions of late and early stage review. But essentially, it captures, once the development is up and running, it captures essentially for them to submit to us financial information of sales actually that have gone through on flats in the development. So I think the standard is set up to 75% of construction, of completion, sorry. So that is what we're applying here, and that will be captured. Integrating affordable housing, as explained before, it is 8 units here. I think linked to the other councillors' query about what if a housing association goes bust, who they've got on board at the moment. Well, essentially, the legal agreement doesn't secure the housing association itself, it secures the affordable housing. So it is important that the affordable housing is attractive to others should that housing association decide to pull out. So that is why it's important. It is 8 units that they are cited in a way that will be attractive for registered providers to take them on board. In terms of the lack of 3-bed units, the site it's fairly small in comparison to the site to the north. The site to the north did deliver some 3-bed townhouses on the northwest side. This site is actually in flood zone 3 a lot more than the site to the north. So there's issues of ground floor accommodation here in terms of residential in flood risk terms. In terms of their market submission, it was marketing consultants who have provided the information with the application on the lack of demand for 3-bed market homes. The housing provider there's a high demand for 3-bed socially rented accommodation, and they are providing the four 3-bed flats as part of the affordable housing. In terms of security fencing, we are conditioning boundary treatments, Chair, so we can take that request away with us and we can liaise with the applicant on the security fencing issue again, whether it's a wall or a fence. We can perhaps take that away with us, Chair. Access to the communal roof gardens, that is for everybody, including the affordable housing. And the green wall, again, is to be conditioned. For details on my colleague here, condition 15 is for the green walls to be secured.
Forgive me. Does that mean?
Thank you. Sorry, 1 second.
Sorry, Chair.
We'll come back. Can I just pick up who hasn't asked the question, if anyone wants to ask it? So Caroline, Matt, and then Susie afterwards.
Yes, I'm a bit concerned when you're saying that there's radioactive materials on the site. So what I wanted to know is, have you looked into if there's any clusters of childhood cancers or liquid tumours such as leukemia or non-Hodgkin lymphoma in the surrounding areas? What is the average? Is it the same as the rest of London, or is it above, or is it below?
Matt?
Thank you, Chair. Just in case the fire service later need access to the end of the site, considering there's a long line of units to get to it, can the proposed undercroft perhaps be made wide enough for a vehicle to future-proof it in case that is required when Wellington Works is developed? And who owns the access track?
Susie again. Sorry, your point about the green, you're going to come back on the green wall.
I was just being picky. Having the green wall is a condition, but what I'm concerned about is its maintenance, because in 2 years' time it might not be there. Is that a condition too, or will it be?
So I think several good questions about ownership and maintenance. So again, who's going to maintain the wall? Be very clear. Matt's question about the undercroft, who owns it and widening, and any impact on design. Caroline's point about probably wider, about how do you measure health outcomes on the type of sites and the impact of these type of isotopes.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the radioactive material and that research, no, that we haven't looked at that. That's not it wouldn't be a material planning consideration in terms of the wider, that sort of wider research into that. In terms of the undercroft to be made wide enough, the undercroft is not the deepest undercroft proposed, so we don't consider that it would be necessary for the fire truck to have to go right up to that aspect. To be honest, there is a lot of some landscaping there in any event. They also have to require submission of a fire statement, which they've done, which is to be conditioned. And ultimately, building regulations would cover all those aspects in terms of fire safety. In terms of ownership of the access track, should the road essentially not be adopted, then it would simply be a management company that would be in charge of the maintenance and upkeep of the road and the communal landscaping area at the front. In terms of the green wall, in terms of maintenance, yes, that is built into the condition. So should it not, someone look at it and go, that's looking awful, it's nothing's happening, they can make a complaint to the council to be investigated that way for enforcement team. Thank you.
Sure. I've got a question coming back, maybe Matt coming back on it as well. What is the sort of the risk there of the lack of ownership for that passage and consequences for that, given that we know we have got casework across our borough of unadopted roads, and there have been issues with that moving forward? What are the risks here we're factoring in your consideration of what you've presented in the paper here? Two more opportunities. Who wants? Dan and Tom, because you've not spoken. Dan next.
Quick to have a follow-up before he moves on to something else. Is that all right?
We'll come back to it, yeah.
My question is a bit of a follow-up, just because I didn't understand the point about what happens if a social housing provider goes bust. I understand the need to make the social housing unit attractive for a future provider, but what is the legal position if none can be found? If there's absolutely no takers, what does happen in that case? What's the legal position?
Good point. And Tom.
The resident that spoke earlier in opposition mentioned about not meeting the minimum standards of urban greening. Could officer comment on that, please? And also the petition that's mentioned in the papers, page 366. Sorry if I've missed it somewhere else in the papers, but I hadn't seen what officers' responses were to the points that were raised by residents there. And given that it mostly seems to be about access during the works, is that something that could be put in as a condition if it isn't already? Thank you.
Thank you. So reverse order. So we're talking about building the building control and how we manage that in terms of the site access, etc. The actual legal position and what is and what isn't in terms of material consideration here as well. And sort of, again, my point about the risk of, in your determination and assessment, what level of risk do you see of this being an unadopted road, and what does this actually mean in terms of wider policy as well?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the, I guess, the risks of I guess you're looking at the risks of the linkage should it not be forthcoming. I think the key thing here is that what the plans are showing is what the permission would be. So they have to build it in accordance with the plans in the first place. We can potentially look at building into the 106 potentially should it become feasibly reasonably available in terms of the access link from the other side, then that can be looked at how that can be opened up to link through. I think the challenge here is we've had lots of discussions with the council's green spaces team, and on the neighbouring site too, they have strongly objected to a link to the park there. So we're from the planning side of things, we think it'll be a good idea. From their side of things, they're concerned with it, antisocial behaviour and costs. But so I do believe that there's a low risk of this side, the developer this side, not being keen to provide that link because they have shown it on the plans and made it available. In terms of the affordable housing providers, should no one wish to take on the units, then the applicants provide that evidence to us in terms of why the affordable housing providers haven't shown interest and not willing to take it on. And in doing that, it would have to be turned into a financial contribution, and those flats will become market flats.
Was what sort of the urban greening side of things, and sort of I assume Tom was getting at our definition or position on that, and then any mitigations in terms of the building.
Chair, in terms of the urban greening, it is a recommendation in the policy. I'll just try and find a relevant section in my report. Bear with me. But I believe that the scheme is only 0.2 below it, but I believe that was due to the office level of provision, and the office is at ground floor level only, and with a lot of the green provision being provided on the flat roofs where appropriate, and in the formal landscape gardens out the front. They have to provide the turning head road for the refuse truck. So given the size of the site, the sort of urban greening factor is limited. And I think the important point to make here is the site is currently hard stand and buildings with very limited urban greening. Apologies, Chair, I can't find that section. Chair, so paragraph 11.8. So it recommends developments for which are predominantly residential as 0.4 and 0.3 for predominantly commercial. So it's in between that, but it's at the top taller end.
Thank you. I promised Matt to come back, and then final one from Tom, and then we'll move to comments.
Thanks, Tim. Just a quick follow-up. Sorry if I wasn't clear. I didn't mean fire access from the road, hitting the landscaping and getting that far into development. I meant fire access from the Durnsford Recreation Ground side. If, for instance, we're changing fire regulations after Grenfell, it becomes apparent that a vehicle would need to get past 10 burning buildings on that street to get to the last one. Could there be provision? Maybe not have the landscaping. I know I've got the project manager here. Have something that in the future, if the rules change or if our thoughts on this change, you could actually get a vehicle in from the other side.
And
so it's just the question from before about the petition and the sort of officer view about that. Sorry.
You mean about the building, the actual constraints on times of building and etc.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's 366 if it helps.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the access to the rear of the site, so it's a very small access track, but under the dealing with the applications that behind it, it has been demonstrated that a fire truck can get down there along with refuse vehicles, but it's not. It's obviously privately owned, but there are certain rights of way to it for the properties in Dawlish Avenue. It couldn't be sort of fully relied upon, but there is an access way there in an emergency. In terms of the petition request, again, this is linked to the access through from the site through to Wellington Works site. As I said before, it has been looked at, but ultimately it's not mandatory. We can't force that to happen as part of looking at a planning application. So the application has to be looked on its merits as proposed. Was there a query on construction access? Yeah, sorry, Chair, in terms of the construction access, there would be no construction vehicles down that access track at the back because it's not related to this site.
Okay, I want to close now for questions, move on to comments. Does anyone have any comments or statements they want to make on this? So Matt, and then Caroline, and that's it for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst a separate building in Block D would not be my preference, the block is designed to keep costs down, being smaller and is extremely energy efficient. So I'm content with the reduced bills for those in the affordable housing. The previous chair said in March that you can't check the cost of contamination until you pull the buildings down. And it was said again tonight. So I am minded in that case to grant this proposal. It is likely that the contamination is less than the Hazelmere site next door. And there is unlikely to be asbestos as they are newer buildings. So, I mean, I visited the site, you get a dead end one side in the park, and you get a dead end on the other side of the street. So the main thing for me is ensuring that there is an opening to the park being an option in the future, vehicular if possible, perhaps even before residents move in. So the people in the affordable housing have access to the green space. And as you said, ensuring items like green roofs are not cut from affordable homes. And so for us, I think it's really important that that late stage review is going to work because if it's found that there's $1 million or $2 million saved on contamination, that needs to be put into the affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Caroline, and then myself.
Yes, I'm still thinking that the radiation safety aspect hasn't been delved into enough. So I won't be voting in favour of this proposal because I would be very worried about women of childbearing age moving onto the site and then finding later on down the track that there is an issue with that.
Thank you. Sorry, Martin, and I'll sum up.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously in relation to this application, I will be supporting this application. I believe that the points on contamination have been answered. Obviously, there will be further tests going forward in terms of the contamination. It's regrettable. It's 9% affordable, but it has been obviously independently viability tested by the council against what was submitted by the developer. I think that is actually crucial going forward. I think obviously in relation to the affordable housing provision, I do have some concerns, but sometimes that's down to housing associations. So on balance, I will be supporting this application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, this is a really, really interesting one, especially since it's come back several times around particularly the same sticking points about the separation of the tenure. Understandably, there's the social housing provider wants economies of scale, et cetera, understand how they want to manage operations. And then clearly there's been some sizable moves from the applicant in the sense of what we've heard tonight, particularly in relation to the preference that rather than given monies, it ought to go into Block A. And that is something I would very much want to see in very, very thick ink, because clearly we want to see more social housing. It's a shame that in the previous application that wasn't possible. And in this one, clearly we were able to deliver that. Radiation is an interesting sort of subject matter in a sense, as the applicant has made clear that you don't know what you're getting until you actually dig, and that's a fair point. But at the same time, I would agree with colleagues tonight that it seems on balance that using the assessment, using the figures from the adjacent site as a fair estimate seems to be an appropriate way forward. And that's given several of the isotopes and issues aren't on this site compared to the other site, we may be able to gain some affordable housing. I say may, but based on the units that we've got tonight, I feel I will support it. But I would very much want to understand and categorically would like further steps taken if the issue of social housing was to change, because there's an absolute winner for me there. And if that were to change, then that puts this into a slightly different light. So what I'm going to do now is propose that we vote. So those who want to vote in favour of the scheme, please raise your hand. Those who would like, those who don't agree with the scheme going forward, please raise your hand.
One, Chairman.
And not voting? No one. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. We'll just take a very, very brief couple of minutes break until 10:10. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. We are joined by Sherry-Ann. Thank you very much. So we're moving on to item 14 in your agenda. So that's 2A Trinity Road. Tim, would you mind introducing this for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application site is a corner site between Trinity Road and South Park Road to the north, Trinity Road on the right. The site currently comprises a building which was used to be used as a former Conservative club, which currently has parking, hard standing in front of it, with very other little surrounds to it. You'll see from my site pictures that the other half of the building has been demolished due to the construction taking place of the YMCA development adjacent next door. You'll also see in the plans that the applicant has put on there the outline of the YMCA development, which would adjoin this site from the south. The proposal itself, so it's a full redevelopment of the site to provide a wholly residential development of 18 flats. The development would comprise 7 1-bed, 9 2-bed and 2 3-bed flats. Majority of the flats would have their own balconies, with the exception of a few due to impact on neighbouring amenity issues, which I can go into later. There would also be a communal roof terrace for all the residents to utilise. The existing plans, so there's the large YMCA building, which is due to be redeveloped. The site is actually here and here, so it's a sort of 2-story with a 1-story extension off it. As I said, majority hard standing and car parking surrounding it. The proposal itself, so it's a split level building of between 4 and 5 stories. So at ground floor level, coming into the site, access would be from Trinity Road on the east here. And then you would have, it's about 4 flats per floor. So ground floor, they have some communal outdoor space for these ground floor flats here. So it's very much the idea of soft landscaping around the edges which front the public highway, as opposed to the current hard standing that's there. First floor level moving up the building, balconies on the front there. There is no balconies for the flats on this side. The reason being is there is residential flats here, and in the pre-application discussions, officers considered actually this could lead to 2 issues of neighbouring amenity. Going further up the building, so at second floor, sorry. Again, similar layout to the first floor. Third floor, slight variances. So the flat up here, for example, is set back with a wraparound roof terrace. And then turning to the top floor, so there's 2 flats here on the southern side. The design staggers down as it comes away from the YMCA development. So as it goes further north, it reduces 1 story in height. The communal roof terrace is here for all users. So elevations, this is fronting Trinity Road. So as you see on the left, the YMCA development, which is under construction, is here. So the height would mirror that, but then step down as it goes further north. As it goes on, you can just see on the right-hand side an existing block of flats, which is opposite the site on South Park Road. This part of the development would be just slightly lower than the roof of this one opposite. So what that flats would face essentially is this. So in the background here is a taller part of the development in the front here. So the design is taken much of a, again, exposed brick design with large glass panels. Variety of brick at the top to help break up the bulk and massing. Some sections drawing. So that would essentially wall would face the YMCA development, so it wouldn't be widely seen by the public. Some 3D visual aids submitted with the application to assist from the junction here at the front. So the idea is that it would become soft landscaping at the front to provide some defensible space, but also usable space for the flats. And then the palette of materials here. You see glass balustrades. Again, tall glass units, mixture of grey, reconstituted stone above the windows, for example, mixing in with the brick walls. And then just a 3D view of the building here. So on that sort of similar angle, this is the existing building. There's not much to look at the moment. As I said, the site next door under construction, and there it is at the front. Existing hard standing on site, and then from Trinity Road, it's currently a rather blank wall at the moment. So within the report, you'll see in the application that we've looked at carefully at the impact on neighbouring amenity, which is the closest flats are here. It's important to note that the windows here and a door serve a kitchen, which is not a habitable room in planning terms. And also they also have windows on the other side which gain light that way. And this view just from really standing further back here. So as I say, the YMCA development is under construction, which is phase 1, which is the YMCA building itself. Phase 2 is the residential, which would adjoin this site. Chair, overall, officers consider this to be a good use of a brownfield site. There's no objection in principle to the loss of the building or its use. It is just within the town centre boundary as well, this site, in a highly accessible location. So purely car-free development is what is proposed here. And in combination with the soft landscaping proposed and design, officers consider the overall scale of development and design to be acceptable and recommend permission be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. We've got no speakers on this item, I don't believe. So I'm going to go to questions from the floor. Are there any questions at all? So we've got Matt, Susie, got one more for luck. Hey, Sherry-Ann, so Matt first.
Thank you, only one. I note the addition of condition 19 in modification sheet that we received today. So if we grant the proposal, is that enough to bring it in line with the approved YMCA plan that there shall also be no noisy works undertaken at weekends? So obviously bank holidays and Sundays are covered in the normal condition, but also Saturday mornings.
Susie.
Matt's just asked my first one. So I have two other short ones. I'm a bit concerned about the lady who lives in number 77 South Park Road. And I had a look at the drawing on page 576. And I wondered if the officer could just tell me what the gap is between the flank wall of the new building and the flank wall of 77.
And Sherry-Ann?
I'm sorry, I had a second one. Forgive me. The other one is somebody raised rainwater harvesting, which sounds like an excellent idea. Any views on making that a condition? Could it be done? Would it be beneficial?
Sherry-Ann.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I noted that some of the units are single aspect units. Will the two affordable units provided on site have dual aspect? Will they be dual aspect?
Excellent question. So dual aspect versus single aspect, we know dual aspect's important. Susie's point about the rainwater harvesting, although I suspect this is, it may unfortunately be let down. What's the gap between the properties, of the property mentioned in page 576, and just confirmation of that additional condition, which creates that parity between the building opposite and this one in terms of development time and hours?
Thank you, Chair. In regards to condition 19, so this was brought to our attention, I think it was today or yesterday. Obviously, the YMCA development is a significantly larger scheme, I think 130 flats or so, but we have looked at that and we have considered that the amendment can be accepted. So that's in the modification sheet, and that is essentially brings it in line with that. That site next door clearly has its own construction management plan, and then this one will also too. So that is accepted. In terms of the gap between the buildings of 77 South Park Road and the site, if you bear with me, Chair, I don't know if it's called by the officer in the report. In terms of actual distance, I don't think it is, but if I just share my screen, Chair, and we'll have a...
Please.
Oh, is that... Sorry, Chair, bear with me.
If I can help, it's
Ah.
described as a good level of separation at page 556. And then the picture is actually at the drawing is actually at page 576. And it doesn't look big.
So, Chair, what I'll put on screen here is essentially the top floor plan. So the design, zoom in the drawing. So number 77 is here. The design does stagger it away from this property, and the tallest aspect of the building is here, which is essentially these two flats. I don't have the distance to hand in the report from the officer, unfortunately, but what is outlined here is a width of a garage and width of the access way. In terms of estimation between there and there, I would say in the middle of 6 meters potentially. The access way, I do have the photograph on file in the presentation, but a typical width of the access way might be 3.5, 4 meters. But it has been designed to stagger away from the flats next door.
And then there's a point about rainwater harvesting and then the single versus dual.
In terms of rainwater harvesting, so we had a condition seeking the details of the drainage strategy to be finalised and secured that way. Rainwater harvesting, I mean, yeah, it might be beneficial. Whether we add it as a condition, Chair, I'm not sure. We have to look at these things as to if we had a condition for this development, then we may have to look at that for all other residential developments coming forward. I think, Chair, if we can take that away with us, that request, potentially, if the application is granted this evening, and liaise with the applicant on that, if we may. And in terms of the affordable units, they have been identified as units 4 and 8, I believe, which is in the report, which are on the eastern side of the building. So bear with me, Chair, whilst I've got the plans up. Oh, apologies, Chair. So 4 is this one here. Sorry, it's on the western side of the building. And 8 is also on the western side of the building here. So those two units have been highlighted by the applicant as what the affordable units would be. So the viability has shown only 2 can be provided, but the starting point is always on site. So we will be seeking to secure that in the hope that they can be taken on by a registered provider.
So I think just clarifying, so we're saying a dual aspect, because what are we saying?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, they are. There's a small window on the south side here, but that would face the YMCA development. So there is
So essentially they get greater light via that. So it's a more pleasant place for those social residents to live effectively. That's the point I think Sherry-Ann was making. Cool. Okay. Unless there's not any more questions, it'd be great if we move to comments. Any comments? No? Okay. So I mean, I will then proceed to a vote. So those who are in favour of this development going through, please raise your hand.
Done, Chairman.
So that's easy. Thank you very much. So we're just before the past deadline, so I want to squeeze one more in if that's okay. That's the pavilions. All right. So thank you everyone for bearing with me. So that is in your agendas. That will be, sorry, my notes are slightly scattered. So we're talking about number 8. And that I believe again is Tim. Oh, it's over Tim. God, you've made a quick transit. All right. Tim, introduce to us, please. Unless you're upstairs hiding. Okay.
Hi there. I am remotely presenting, not in the building. Thank you, Chair. Bear with me for just one moment. Okay. Thank you, members. So the pavilions, a prior approval application for 6 additional units in the form of a rooftop extension. You'll find the site description at page 67 of the agenda. And you can see here the site location plan. So Bushy Road here with the A3 being further over this way. Open space to the south, 2 flatted blocks here. More traditional housing here, and a more recent housing development, which this block of flats is part of. Here you can see the wider site location, and here in red is the application building. I'm afraid this photo hasn't come out very well, but that is effectively looking in from Greenview Drive at the subject building. And then here is other development along the road that would effectively be on the left as you're approaching the building. And this is a view from the side, from the south, from the open space. In terms of the development itself, it is a rooftop development which would continue the existing footprint of the floors below. There would be additional bin and bike storage to be located on this side of the site. This is the existing bike store, bin store, which would be extended. Here you can see the existing plans and existing elevations. And this is where the bin store extension would be, and additional cycle parking, and 6 new car parking spaces to serve the 6 new flats. And here's a layout of the proposed new floor plan. And here you can see the proposal in elevational format. So grey aluminium cladding to form an additional story, but following on the balconies and fenestration in terms of window layout from that below. And here in slightly more detail, you can see the palette of materials that's intended. Part of this assessment is a key part of this assessment is that there is a previous permission in place to allow for 12 units. So if you bear with me, I'm having some trouble sharing my screen there, but I just wanted to show you this. This proposal is the previous scheme that has already been granted. So an additional 2 floors, one of them in brickwork, and then one of them in the aluminium cladding, as is similar to the current application. So that's just to give you an idea of what has been permitted and is now extant on the site. So this scheme is 1 floor lower, 6 units instead of 12, 6 parking spaces instead of 12 parking spaces. Now, members will be aware that this is a prior approval application rather than a planning application. So we are more limited in what factors we can consider in the assessment. We can't apply all the policies of the development plan as we normally would do. So you'll see at page 66, it's set out what we can assess it on. That is transport, air traffic, contamination, flooding, visual appearance, adequacy of natural light to new units, impact on neighbouring amenity of existing residential occupiers, impact on protected views and fire safety. Issues such as air traffic, contamination, and protective views are not really for consideration here because there is no issue. As set out in the report, the impact of the proposal will be less than the previously approved scheme, which is a material consideration in the assessment, and the proposal is considered to be acceptable on the above grounds as set out in the report. Members should consider whether the impact on the above matters is acceptable in reaching their conclusion. And you'll see on page 89 that the officer recommendation is to approve subject to a range of conditions. I would draw your attention to the modification sheet and the responses to various queries which have been set out there. The site is in a flood zone, and we originally did have an objection from the Environment Agency. It seems that that was in error because they had not objected to the previous scheme, and following conversations between the Environment Agency and the original case officer for this scheme, who's since left the council, that matter was resolved, and the Environment Agency provided a updated response to set out that they didn't object. The key part of those discussions was whether there was going to be any raising of land within the flood zone area. It was confirmed that there wasn't, and that was enabled the Environment Agency to withdraw their objection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. So what I'd like to do now is call speakers. We've got 5 speakers in all. Apologies, I will pronounce your name wrong. Is it Chuk Young Kwon? Thank you very much.
Good evening, Councillor. As a resident, I'm speaking against the application for the following reason with support of submitted reports and documents that I have emailed to the Councillor. Firstly, the elevation submitted to the Planning Council does not fully reflect the impact to the environment. We have done a photo montage, and it clearly shows that the appearance of one of the most appealing building groups is damaged. The new building height is out of proportion, and it is such a damage to the wholesome setting in terms of material, texture, and color. And this also blocks the open view of the bushy court as shown in the analysis. The other thing I want to say is about the negative impact on the amenity facilities. The central garden space enjoyed and maintained by the resident will be reduced in size and closed during the construction. The lift within the building will be suspended for the extension of the lift shaft, which will inevitably against the building guidelines and codes of practice for accessible environment. The parking space next to the building needed to be closed as they will put up the crane next to the car park area. All these amenity facilities are protected under lease, and residents has the legal right to use it as they pay a proper management fee for these facilities. The other thing I want to talk about is the fire risk and safety. According to the fire risk report, assessment report, the balcony in the external facade are made of combustible material, which has the highest level of fire severity level. And the construction work will only make this fire risk more likely to happen. Although mentioned, there is only one escape staircase within the building. There are also attempts of unauthorized work by the applicant's contractor trying to carry out the work without notice to the residents and without any precaution measures. I think everyone should remember the 4-story timber building that burned to ground in Water Park, and also the disaster that happened in Grenfell Tower. With this poor record of the applicant, the safety of the resident is at high risk. The other thing I want to talk about is the structural stability. In addition, the structural report also indicates that the load-bearing wall not only located in the building envelope, but also located within the apartment itself. The internal timber frame needed strengthening, no matter it is a 1-story or a 2-story extension, which is inside the residential unit. The environmental report also shows that the site is of significant risk of flooding, and the ground subsidence is moderate to high. The addition of loading of extension will certainly have negative impact on the ground stability and the foundation. To conclude, the prior approval of two-story extension doesn't mean it is righteous to approve the one-story extension.
Time, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. John Murch, who's the agent, is unable to attend, so Amy will read out a statement on their behalf.
Good evening, members. First of all, my sincere apologies for not being at the committee in person. I'm away on a family holiday and only found out about the application being presented to you early in the week. Some of the committee members will be aware that this application follows the approval of a similar two-story scheme last year. I've been told that scheme is due to be implemented imminently, with works expecting to start on site in the next few weeks and delivered by a contractor with significant experience of airspace development. At the time the application before you this evening was submitted, it wasn't clear whether the two-story scheme could be delivered. We therefore submitted this application to the council as a fallback. As confirmed by officers, it complies with all of the criteria set out within the legislation. Furthermore, the approved scheme is a material consideration that should be given significant weight. Therefore, there would be no reasonable basis for a refusal. We respectfully request that the committee uphold the officer's recommendation and approve the scheme. Thank you, and apologies again for being unable to address you in person this evening.
Thank you very much there, Amy. Before we we'll move to councillor comments. John, Robert, and Hina, you're all speaking on this, is that correct? So John, do you want to go first, or?
Okay, thank you. These are just some questions, really, some comments that occurred to me as I read through. So obviously this is under the General Permitted Development Order of 2020 for property constructed between 1948 and 2018. As I trust you've checked the dates. The questions I had were, when the flats were marketed to the existing tenants, were any undertakings given explicitly or implied about whether an upward extension was intended? And if such a thing was at that stage intended, then it should have been disclosed. In particular, were any of the flats that are likely to be most affected, in other words, the ones at present at the top of the building, marketed as being penthouses or anything of that nature, which they will no longer be? Most leases, and probably these as well, include terms guaranteeing quiet enjoyment. As we know, quiet enjoyment doesn't mean silent enjoyment. It's a technical term meaning that you are able to avoid substantial interference with the freedom of action in exercising rights as a tenant. So all I would ask there is that perhaps you can make conditions that would recognize the fact that some people are going to suffer severe disruption during a period of time, that there have been cases where, for example, scaffolding has been left on buildings for 2 years, that sort of thing, that maybe conditions can limit the construction period and limit the times when noise can be inflicted on other residents. These days, of course, it's quite normal for people to work at home. So therefore, daytime noise can be very disruptive, and I'm sure that that could be regarded as denying the tenant their opportunity to quietly enjoy their property. Similarly, it seems that tenants are going to lose in the construction of extra parking spaces. They're going to lose access to some of the green space, which was part of the development when it was originally built. So they're going to suffer a loss from that, a derogation from that. So that should be considered, and they should be compensated. Furthermore, there should be indemnity in case there's any damage during the course of construction. And I'm also worried that service charges, what is the effect on their service charges or maintenance charges or whatever of this extra construction? Is it going to, they shouldn't really have to pay any extra or be any extra liability on account of this action on the part of the freeholder. Similarly, what about ground rent? The amount of ground is the same, the amount of flats has increased. One would hope that the ground rent would be adjusted accordingly. So those are just the sort of considerations that occur to me in considering this application. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on something that John's already mentioned, which is the lack of protection in the existing conditions for the existing leaseholders, particularly the service charges, the likely impact on insurance premiums of the building being taller, you know, the increase use of shared spaces and facilities is likely to increase the wear and tear on things like the lifts and the vertical transportation. You know, under the terms set out, the developer is likely to build this extension, but the leaseholders will be left with sort of any long-term financial consequences of that decision. So I'd ask that if the application is approved, then strong conditions are put in place to protect those existing residents from any negative financial consequences as a result of the building being extended. That's all I want to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Hina.
Hi, I'm going to be focusing on fire safety. And it just so happens that this is the week that 5 years ago Grenfell occurred. And so it does seem apt that we do focus on this particular issue. And I questioned the Commissioner of the London Fire Brigade actually yesterday, Andy Rowe, who was scathing about how planning committees don't really concentrate on this particular aspect, and many applications do go through without actually meeting the gold standard that the London Fire Brigade would regard as safe. So I would consider, please, looking into the fact that there is a fire risk report that has been mentioned, but the severity of severity 4 fire risk, which is the highest severity. And that means that this is an additional floor. We must make sure that there is clear fire safety routes out of that building. From what we can see, and please let me know if this is correct, officers, there is not enough stairs. No, hold on. Yeah, there's a lift that goes all the way up, but there's not enough access to stairs for those top level, the people on the top floor. But if you can find a way to explain that to me, then I appreciate it, because right now it doesn't look safe to me. The additional stories, the residents are very concerned about the additional stories. They're concerned about, and the way that they have been unsatisfactorily strengthened. They are very concerned about the strength of the building, whether it can cope, whether the design of the building is actually equipped. There was a resident who is an architect who wasn't able to speak today, who would have given a bit more detail about this particular concern. There is also the actual process itself. The lift will not be in action throughout the development. So that means elderly and disabled residents are going to really struggle to live in the property while the development is going on. And there's been no consideration for them while the development is going on. There are a number of residents who have flagged these concerns to us. We just want to make sure that we think very carefully before we go ahead. And if we do have to go ahead, please delay it until you get proper London Fire Brigade analysis of the fire safety risks here. I would rather trust their judgment than an independent group that the developer's gone for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hina. Tim. Be interested particularly to come back on any points relating to the fire assessment, but also if we have any information on the tenure of those of the blocks, but also confirmation in my understanding that if you were to put restrictions on the way the block will be constructed, it will inhibit its actual delivery, because if you do it during the daytime, people may be at work. If you do it in the evening, people will be at home. So just understand that the practicalities of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a number of points to come back on there, and a number of very interesting points for discussion. However, some of them are not what we can consider in the remit of this application. There are going to be a number of upwards roof extensions to flatted blocks across London as a result of this prior approval. And often a complaint from top floor occupiers is, we bought this flat on the basis it was top floor, it is a penthouse. This was never made clear at the time. Obviously, it may not have been made clear at the time. The idea may not have come to fruition at that point. Unfortunately, whilst it's an interesting point, it's nothing to do with the planning assessment as to whether the top floor units were marketed as penthouses or whether there was any agreement that there wouldn't be additional floors added. One thing to point out is that in the lease, if it does, or if they do have an agreement, the occupiers have an agreement that there will be no additional floors, the granting of this permission wouldn't override that. So planning permission, and in this case, prior approval permission, doesn't convey an ultimate right to develop. If there are other legal obstacles standing in the way, it wouldn't trump those. However, it's not something we can consider in the planning process. It is inevitable that there will be disturbance. The most we can do in planning terms is to impose safeguarding conditions to minimize that impact. And we can't go further than is reasonable. So we can restrict working hours, but we couldn't restrict them to unusual times. It would have to be the standard during the day working hours, nothing on Sundays and bank holidays. In terms of tenants losing green space, yes, this is another factor, and I can appreciate why residents would object to losing any of the existing green space. However, in planning terms, what we're looking at is London Plan requirements for the amount of amenity space for each unit, which is very limited. So in planning terms, we have no justification to say that the overall level of amenity space provided for the units would now be unacceptable as a result of this proposal. Each unit has a balcony or terrace, the communal spaces in addition. So whilst I can appreciate that residents would want to keep this amenity space, it's not something that we can reasonably raise objection to in planning terms. Again, issues of service charges and ground rents cannot reasonably be dealt with through condition because they are not a material planning consideration. Whether the system in the future will change to take that into account is a matter for speculation, but as it stands currently, there's no justification to include that in the conditions. Moving on to fire safety, you'll see in the report that fire safety is a consideration if the building is over a certain height. In this case, it isn't, so it would still be subject to building regulations approval, but we wouldn't be in a position to be able to warrant a refusal of the application, given that the fire requirements don't kick in until the building is at a certain height. It would, however, be subject to the stringent building control regulations, which would deal with this. I note the comments about fire safety not necessarily being incorporated into planning committee decisions, which it seems strange because it is fundamentally a technical building control matter rather than a matter of judgment, which is the planning side of it. So this matter is dealt with under building control. Were the building higher, they would also have to set out that information at this application stage. However, the requirements of the prior approval are such they don't need to provide additional information on that point. As I say, it would be subject to building control in any event. In terms of structural stability, it could well be that the ground conditions are such that there are issues of structural stability, and indeed the information that the objector who spoke sent round earlier is a report on the property which indicates flooding, ground contamination, structural stability, etc. Again, this isn't a factor for the planning application. It is a factor for building control. There can't be external visible supports as part of the proposal, so there is an implication in the prior approval legislation that the building does have to be strong enough to support an additional floor. It could be that the previous proposal for 2 floors wasn't implemented because of this. So they've come back in, having done more structural calculations and have concluded that 1 additional floor could be accommodated, but it's simply not something that can be considered at this prior approval stage of the development. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. So over to the committee for any questions. We've got Matt, Sherianne, and Susie.
Thank you. We've seen the garden space in 2D just now with Tim. Even when printed in green, it doesn't give the committee a full sense of the space. And when I went down and saw it in 3D, it's a large mound that will be cut out and not even adjacent to the building in question. So what am I asking here? I think it's, I understand prior approval for additional floors, but with a PTAL rating of 4 or for layout reasons, could the parking be removed at this point?
Sharia?
It's more of a point of clarification, actually. The gentleman who sent his remarks to Amy, was that the applicant?
It was, yes.
It was. Okay, thank you.
And Susie?
It's a very small one. Can we add an informative for Swift boxes? There seems no reason not to.
Tim, you said it's Swift boxes. I think that was touched on in the modification sheet as well. And the mentioned about the mound and removing the parking from this application.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Swift boxes, yes, that can be certainly added on as an informative. It's something we responded to in the mods sheet. So thank you for that suggestion. In terms of removing parking, I hadn't looked into this quite as of yet. It's possible. I mean, the site has a PTAL of 4, so that's reasonably high. That's the sort of level that we'd be looking at if we were to propose or be happy with no parking. The difficulty is whether it is unacceptable in planning terms. So it meets the London Plan maximum standards. It doesn't reduce amenity space to the extent that there would be a planning in an objection in policy terms. So were this something that had been volunteered by the applicant, we could potentially consider it. But what we need to do is consider the application we have in front of us. And my opinion would be that a reason for refusal based on the provision of parking and the reduction in the green amenity space there wouldn't be sufficient to stand up at appeal. However, if the applicant came in and wanted to do that, there may be some scope for it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions before we go to Caroline, then we'll go to comments.
Yeah, it's just a question about the air quality, because the extra 2 levels that are being put on are right up against Bushy Road where it turns into the A3, and at busy times you've got standing traffic with all that those fumes. So what, I mean, have any assessments been done?
Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me for just a moment. I'm just scrolling through the report to feed back on this. It's a good question. The whole of Merton is an air quality monitoring area, and air quality is something which is very much at the top of the agenda in planning decisions and for the council as a whole. That being said, air quality is not a consideration for this type of prior approval application. So there would be no basis in terms of the decision-making powers at the disposal of members to resist the application based on air quality. So I'm afraid it's not something that can be covered under this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. So over to comments. I'll go first. So I think it's a really interesting one, hearing a lot of the panel's comments as well, because there's clear frustration in what is ultimately national policy. And there are things we would like to do, we'd like to see, things we can't. And this is probably where our hands are slightly more tied than we want to as a committee member, and the frustration. Yeah, well, if you can talk about those as well, that'd be another thing. But this, the frustration, is clearly shown. That being said, this has reduced from 2 to 1 in terms of stories. We do again need more housing. This is one aspect that has been given a permitted development. We all have. I mean, my main concern of this would be again, going back to EV charge, and we talked about this in the first application with Dan's question, how do we future-proof this? How do we think again, given the increased rise in energy costs? But we know we can't necessarily force the applicant to move beyond policy, especially given our various plans are in the flux of acceptance with the planning inspectorate. So I'll be supporting this application. Is there any other comments? Matt?
Yeah, I just want to thank officers for preparing the supplementary agenda, because I can see in there that the modification sheet states that the reduction in size of the common garden is noted, and whilst residents may prefer to retain the garden, it's not objectionable in planning terms, and Tim mentioned that again. So as I cannot find a material planning consideration, I will be voting for this proposal.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with the council's comments there. I can't find a material planning application to defer or to refuse. Realistically, national policies have sadly tied our hands here, so I am, of course, minded to approve.
Thank you very much. If there's no one else, then we'll go to a vote. All those in supporting this application, raise hands.
10, Chairman.
Sure, 1, 2,
Sorry, 9.
9. All those against?
1.
Not voting, 0. Brilliant. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. That has passed. And what we'll do is just move to the last 2 items of business. So that is the, bring up the agenda, sorry. So we had, so these are the teething problems when you all move to digital. You'll need multiple screens and make sure your laptop doesn't die halfway through. So we have items 19 and 20. So take an item first, that's the planning appeals decisions. Is that noted? Is there any issues or questions? Noted. And item 20, so that's the summary of current cases. Any questions or issues? Is that noted? Thank you very much. I close these proceedings. Take care. Thank you again. So that item will be rolled over to another committee. Thank you very much.